The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Gar Alperovitz's book, What Then Must We Do? Gar is an economist, by the way, and this is from the introduction. I borrowed my title, What Then Must We Do, from Tolstoy and the profoundly disturbing 1886 book that he wrote once he began to dig below the surface of what was happening in late 19th century Russia, a time when the system was in decay, the aristocracy enjoyed extraordinary luxury, and the peasants endured lives of hunger and pain. As a person of privilege, he began to understand something deeper about his time in history. Tolstoy wrote, I sit on a man's back, choking him and making him carry me, and yet assure myself and others that I am very sorry for him and wish to ease his lot by all means possible, except by getting off his back. Most of us do not literally sit on men's backs, making them carry us. We do, however, often uneasily look the other way, satisfying ourselves with modest changes that reassure us that all is well, while millions are in despair. We've done the best we can do, we might say, given the realities. Still, many sense, as did Tolstoy, that to actually do something serious would require us to confront much deeper problems than we are commonly willing to do. What then must we do is not shouted in the streets, but it is a question that more and more Americans, young and old, liberal, radical, and conservative, are quietly beginning to ask themselves in much more penetrating ways. So let us begin. My starting point is the obvious fact that despite its great wealth, the United States faces today enormous difficulties, with no easily discernible political answers that even begin to offer strategic handholds on a truly democratic future. Elections occur and major fiscal debates ensue, but many of the most pressing problems facing ordinary citizens are only marginally affected, and in many cases in ways that increase burdens, not reduce them. The issue is not simply that our situation is worrisome, however. It is that there are growing reasons to believe that we in fact face systemic problems, not simply political ones. Systemic problems in the fundamental, not the superficial sense. In the pages ahead, I will suggest that our nation's truly critical problems are built into the very structure of the economic and political system. They are not something passing in the night that will go away even when we elect forward-looking thinkers and actively pressure them to move in a different direction. I won't load you down with statistics at this point. A couple of obvious reminders, however. Not only has the economy been stagnating for a long time, but for the average person and the average family, things have been bad for a very long time. Real wages for 80% of Americans' workers, for example, have not gone up more than a trivial amount for the last 3 decades. At the same time, income for the top 1% has jumped from nearly 10% of all income to roughly 20% of all income. Put another way, virtually all of the gains of the entire economic system have gone to the tiny, tiny group at the top for at least 3 decades. Worth pausing to think about that one. What's going on when virtually all the gains for the entire economic system go to the top? I'm not interested here in criticizing those at the top. The question is, we can do that later, the question is, what is going on with the system when this kind of thing happens and continues to happen in an ongoing way, year after year, decade after decade? Another reminder, almost 50 million Americans live in officially defined poverty. The rate is higher, not lower, than in the late 1960s, another disturbing trend marker. Moreover, if we use the measuring standard common throughout the advanced world, which considers the poverty level to be half the median income level, the number would be just under 70 million, and the rate would be almost 23% of all Americans living in poverty. That is to say nothing of steady increases in global warming and an unemployment rate that, if properly measured, is stuck in the range of roughly 15%. At the most superficial level, Washington, as the saying goes, is broken. Give or take an occasional gain in selected areas, the political system is simply incapable of dealing with the deeper challenges. Its focus on deficits it focuses on deficits, not answers. Long trends that don't change are a clear signal that it's not simply the modern period of partisan bickering and congressional stalemate that is causing the problems. The trends are moving steadily downward. We're moving steadily downward long before the Tea Party and the recent partisan foolishness, long before the Citizens United Supreme Court decision allowed corporations to put big money directly into politics, and long before many events that have heralded as tipping points one kind or another. Nor are people stupid. More and more have a sense that something different is going on, both with the economy and more fundamentally with democracy itself. A few more bits of information just as reminders again of something that we're all beginning to see. A mid-2011 poll found that roughly 80% of Americans believe their congressional representatives to be, quote, more interested in serving the needs of special interest groups than the people they represent, end quote. Another poll found that almost 4 out of 5 believe a few rich people in corporations have far too much power. And only 37% of Americans, much more than a third of the population, have confidence in the most solemn and august of American institutions, the Supreme Court. I'm going to dig much, much deeper into all of this, of course, but for now, let's leave it at this. When critical, long trends do not improve, when they steadily get worse year in and year out, it is clear that we face deeply rooted systemic problems, not simply political problems in the usual sense of the term. Moreover, as these polls suggest, people increasingly understand that something is really wrong. The question is, how do we deal with a systemic crisis, something built into the way the political economy works, rather than just a simple political...
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. It is Friday the 13th, if that's of consequence. I've started 2 businesses on Friday the 13th, and they both did really well. It's always been a lucky day for me. But anyhow, we've got just a huge pile of news, which we will get to in just a few minutes. But first, Lori Wallach is on the line with us, and this is news, too. She is the Director of International Campaigns with Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. Tradewatch.org is the website. It's also citizen.org/trade. You can tweet her at Wallach, W-A-L-L-A-C-H, Lori, L-O-R-I, or at public_citizen or at PCGTW. Lori, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
It's always great having you on.
I'm up here in D.C. in the halls of Congress, and
oh my.
Lots of stuff going on around me. Pleasure to be on. Yeah,
in the proverbial belly of the beast. So Donald Trump is, one of his major campaign things, in fact, I would say probably one of the things that got him the Republican nomination and maybe even got him the White House was his opposition to so-called free trade, and specifically his opposition to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. An opposition, by the way, that I think we all should note had by that point in time morphed into the Democratic Party as well. Hillary Clinton had repudiated it. What's the latest?
Well, yesterday the news started breaking that the president had instructed some of his senior economic and trade advisors to go look into whether it made sense to try and rejoin the TPP. And the backstory of it is he was having a meeting with some farm state senators and governors who were griping about the threats of tariffs on China. They don't really care if the trade deficit with China gets fixed or if we have any manufacturing jobs. Apparently, they're worried about the prospect that in a couple of months, if there isn't a deal cut with China to balance trade, then there could be tariffs that could affect agriculture. So they were in there sort of schooling him about that, and they said, if you knew what you were doing in agriculture, you export markets, you wouldn't have ever given up on the TPP. Well, he apparently, according to all the news reports, said something like, well, I'll have my guys look into what kind of a deal we could make to get ourselves into a better kind of TPP. And the senators went out and announced that he was reconsidering TPP, and I then responded with a set of expletives that we can't repeat on the radio. However, it would be the most cynical, two-faced, flip-flopping betrayal possible.
Yeah. So essentially, it looks like he's trying to placate red state senators, particularly Iowa, where the Republicans are getting some considerable heat, and it could hurt them electorally in the 2018 elections. Is that kind of the bottom line here?
Well, I think, Tom, the more I've looked into it and I've been talking to a lot of people, I think it's a classic example of the president says whatever the audience he's with wants to hear. He has a very keen sense of his audience. And so whether it means a damn thing or not remains to be seen. But within 2 or 3 hours, as the AFL-CIO president talked about how TPP was a very bad deal, needed to stay dead, and there was no way to be in it without betraying American workers, after basically numerous Democratic campaign operatives were popping champagne corks for the opportunity that it created, and many Democratic members of the House and Senate had issued very stark statements. The White House issued a statement saying, to clarify what the president said, when he withdrew from TPP, I will add a footnote, an agreement that was already dead in Congress, but when he withdrew from TPP, it was because it was an agreement that was bad for working Americans, blah, blah, blah. And all he was saying is he will have his top guys check out what kind of better deal could be negotiated that might be worth reconsidering. So they were backpedaling at high speed. That's all fine and good. If I had to bet, Tom, I wouldn't say that they're serious about it. However, the notion of this president who spent so much time pledging to the American people that he was going to replace our failed trade policy, it's a real issue. He is basically saying what Democrats have been saying for decades. He is saying what Bernie Sanders was saying before Trump was saying it. So the fact that he came to that, he won in no small part because of that. He then touted killing TPP, even when he didn't, but he did officially bury it. And then the notion that he even be contemplating it's worth looking into how to fix it to make it acceptable, it's something like a vegetarian deciding to have a conversation about whether a hamburger is best rare or medium rare. It just shouldn't be in the vocabulary.
Yeah, and frankly, as you pointed out, I think this is really important to point out, while there have been a minority of corporate Democrats who have been in favor of these trade deals throughout the years, starting with Bill Clinton, that this has never been the official position of the Democratic Party. The Democrats, by and large, have always favored protectionism. It was one of the reasons why Bill Clinton, in 1992, nearly lost the election. Ross Perot pulling 20% of the vote away, and
That's right.
that little tidbit never gets mentioned in the corporate media, tragically. Lori, I have a question for you. Yesterday, I had a caller call up, and in fact, I'd seen the article a few days ago, I think, in either the Post or the New York Times about how, TPP and free trade is actually a wonderful thing, because if we buy things from China, we get cheap stuff, and all they get is our money. So that's like, such a benefit to us. And I walked him through this whole laborious, painful thing of, if they end up with our money, they can use that to buy us. And 1/7 of all American assets are now owned by foreigners, which means that when those assets are used, whether they're buildings, office buildings, or whether they're factories, the profits all go to China, and not just China, Germany, Japan, fill in the blanks. And that's a steady and slow draining of the wealth of America, number one. And number two, a surrender of sovereignty. It's reached such a terrible point now that we can't even make a cruise missile. We can't build a battleship without parts from China, a country that we're actually considering at some point in time we may have to go to war with, and that this is suicidal. Was that the strongest argument, and do you agree with me?
Well, you are so on to the right big picture vision of this that actually I can send your listeners, and you would enjoy looking at, a new feature we just put into our tradewatch.org, www.tradewatch.org website, which is we actually spent a year looking into all of the Chinese investments since 2002 in the United States, in what sectors, whether it's government investments, state-owned companies, or sovereign wealth funds, or it's private sector. And what we've basically been able to see systematically, because tens of billions of dollars have gotten reinvested buying up U.S. assets is the recycling of the trade deficit with China into the Chinese government buying up huge swaths of our economy. Tom, this is what we found. Again, this is on the front page of our website, tradewatch.org. We found that since 2002, 60%, 60%, of all of this massive billions in Chinese buying up of U.S. companies, real estate, buildings, has been done by 15 government investment funds or government state-owned companies. So it's not just Chinese companies, it is the government. So your point is spot on.
I'm on tradewatch.org. It redirected me to citizen.org/our-work/globalization-and-trade, but I'm not seeing. Well, I'll have to dig into it, Lori, because we're hitting a break. Lori Wallach, thanks so much, Lori. It's always great talking with you. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being with us. Look forward to
talking again soon. Thank you.
Me too. Me too. Tradewatch.org or citizen.org/trade. You can tweet her at Wallach Lori, and serious, really important stuff. Pay attention. It's Anything Goes Friday. We'll be back with your calls.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And a big pile of the news of the day. There's just some shocking stuff going on. It starts with James Comey's new book out. Welcome back. Mark in Valley, Washington, watching us on Free Speech TV. Mark, what's on your mind today?
Well, did you see that little clip from Gingrich on Fox News where he's saying these FBI raids on Cohen were the equivalent of Stalin and the Nazis?
I didn't see it on Fox News. I read about it in the New York Times.
I just find it just kind of humorous that considering when they did their no-knock warrant, at least on Manafort, they took the door off and they just went and knocked on his door to wake him up. You know, if you're in a poor neighborhood and you're doing a no-knock warrant, they blast your door and shoot your dog, round everybody up at gunpoint and put you on your knees.
Yeah.
But nobody talks about that being fashion.
Yeah. And they did not treat Manafort or, I guess this is the two big ones, Manafort or Michael Cohen, as if they were, gangbangers or whatever, or frankly, let's just speak it out loud. They didn't treat them like they were black people, which is how generally they execute these kind of, or poor people, right? Which is how generally they execute these warrants. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Mark.
If you're poor, they don't treat you the same.
Yeah. Welcome to America.
Exactly.
Point well made. Point well made, Mark. Thanks a lot for the call. Very well said. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I saw Lori Wallach, and this is kind of a generalization over the last 10 or 15 years, the development of Walmart, how they put American manufacturers out of work by supporting Chinese manufacturers against them in court, and how they put mom and pops, they use municipal funds for infrastructure and streets and stuff like that to put their stores in specific locations, putting mom and pop stores out of business in the past. And now here we are, a society a small section of our society, or a major section of our society, is dependent on the cheap plastic crap that Walmart sells. So as we look at this, where we are precariously perched with the $21 trillion in debt, multiple wars or military actions that are going to need to borrow money, infrastructure that's fallen apart, if there is a trade war or that there's a bottleneck in there from the cheap plastic crap that comes to these stores like Walmart, are we looking at a whole other bankruptcy and a fiasco where the taxpayers is going to end up in the middle of, it's a snowball, I think. Are we looking at a snowball effect
Yeah,
that is
well,
gonna
we're
be-
already there. We're already there, Randy. Not only has that transfer of wealth to China made the 5 heirs of the Walton family collectively the richest family in the world, but it has, or at least that we know of, I mean, there's some pretty corrupt dictatorships out there and whatnot, but it has also, as Lori just pointed out, led to the transfer, led to the purchase. 60% of Chinese acquisitions in the United States now are on behalf of the government of China. So literally, the government of China is buying the economic infrastructure of the United States. So we're there and we're past it, Randy. I mean, this is bad, bad, bad stuff. Randy, thanks a lot for the call. Brought to you courtesy, by the way, all of this stuff brought to you courtesy of the neoliberals, whether they are Democrats or Republicans, and they are both. We'll be back. Is in the news that I just wanted to cover with you before we just dig into the day. Other than Lori in the first hour and the possibility, as it was yesterday, that my old friend Sam Cedar may drop by for a little bit in the third hour of the program, and we'll see. You get to these conferences and you get busy and whatnot. And Sam's doing his own show right now as we speak. So. But other than that, we're just going to be open for your phone calls all day. But there are a few things I wanted to share with you that I think are really of consequence. So let's start with Donald Trump's tweets today. The pressure. First of all, he tweeted about the border wall. Right? He said, and this is a quote from Donald Trump. His tweet. Actually, it was day before yesterday, April 13th. He says, tremendous pressure is building like never before for the border wall and an end to crime-cradling sanctuary cities. We started the wall in San Diego, where the people are pushing really hard to get it. They will soon be protected. Okay, well, let's reality check this. Gabe Ortiz did this over at Daily Kos, and it's absolutely brilliant. First of all, he thinks that everybody loves the border wall, right? 63% of Americans oppose building a stupid wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. In fact, there's even evidence that Trump made the idea less popular when he endorsed it, but 63% of us say, no, we don't want no stinking wall. Americans are on sanctuary cities, a plurality, 48% of Americans support sanctuary cities. 47% of Americans oppose them, and that number was much, much lower before Donald Trump got on his high horse and started lying through Fox News about this. But the reality, what we do know, is that sanctuary cities are actually safer. They have lower crime rates and higher conviction rates. Why? Because immigrants are not afraid to report crimes. If you're not in a sanctuary city and you dial 911 and say there's somebody breaking into the house next door to me, you may get deported. But in a sanctuary city, immigrants know that they can dial 911 anytime, whether they're the victims of a crime or their next door neighbor is, and report it. And they do, by the way. Most of them just want to be good, upstanding, members of society. As the Toronto Star's Daniel Dale points out, quote, prototypes for Trump's wall were erected in San Diego, but no actual construction has happened there. So this is the second time in 2 months that Trump has lied about the wall being built in Calexico. It's actually a repair job that Barack Obama ordered. Also, the city, and then he says, that San Diego wanted the wall. Right? He says, started the wall in San Diego where people are pushing really hard to get it. That's his verbatim quote from Trump's tweet. And this is what the mayor, the Republican mayor of San Diego said, quote, building bridges has worked wonders for the San Diego-Tijuana region. San Diego doesn't want the wall. 60%, the majority of Republicans in San Diego don't want the wall. San Diego's crime rate has dropped to the lowest rate in 49 years, which the city leaders attribute to close ties between police and community members. Community members, by the way, many of them being Mexican immigrants. And as Ted Lieu points out, the wall hasn't started because Congress hasn't funded it. Okay. A few other things. This is from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Mick Mulvaney testified before Congress yesterday, and he said, the law says I have to appear before Congress, but I don't have to talk to you guys. That's how he started it. Mick Mulvaney, the budget director that Trump put in charge of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, which has recovered over $13 billion from sleazy banks that, like the Big Five in New York, and given back to consumers. All the money goes back to you and me. When we get ripped off, the CFPB goes to bat for us. And this is from Americans for Financial Reform. There's a dirty little secret in automobile financing that's been true for decades. If you're black or brown, you pay more than if you're white for financing of a car. The 2015 Consumer Financial Protection Bureau warned auto lenders that if they use so-called dealer markups to discriminate against people of color, or basically rip them off, the Consumer Protection Bureau would investigate them for violations of the law. And now, and by the way, they required a group of banks to pay back more than $150 million in fines and restitution to 425,000 minority borrowers who got stuck with an average of several $100s extra in car loan payments every month because of this racial discrimination by these lenders. CFPB cracked down on them. So what's going on right now? Republicans in the Senate want to repeal the actions of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau with a Congressional Review Act resolution that will undo that rule. And they want the CFPB to stopping banks from ripping off black and brown, people of color, presumably Asians and Native Americans as well. This is Republicans, right? This is Republican America. This is just absolutely incredible. Meanwhile, the post office is the largest unionized employer in the United States. Donald Trump has just put together a task force to evaluate the Postal Service. The requirement that they put $5 billion a year aside to pay for health care for people who retire 75 years from now is going to expire fairly soon, which means the post office is going to be back in good shape. And Donald Trump, of course, doesn't want that to happen. Again, the largest unionized employer in America. They talked about using electric cars. Bad news for
to
Trump.
The Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So I've got some more news here. I'll sprinkle it throughout the show today. We've got another 2.5 hours to go. In the meantime, we'll be picking up your calls right after this break. Today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's collected poems. This is the 1841 edition, but there's modern ones available too. It's the same poems. I want to start with a Psalm of Life, one of my favorites, one that I learned as a kid. Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, for the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way, but to act that each tomorrow finds us further than today. Art is long and time is fleeting, and our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. In the world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb, driven cattle. Be a hero in the strife. Lives of, I trust no future, however present. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act within the living present, heart within and God o'erhead. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footsteps in the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another sailing o'er life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing, will take heart again. Let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing. Learn to labor and to wait. And the book opens with Voices of the Night, another of his brilliant poems. This is from the prelude. Pleasant it was when woods were green and winds were soft and low, to lie amid some sylvan scene where the long drooping boughs between, shadows dark and sunlight sheen, alternate come and go. Or where the denser grove receives no sunlight from above, but the dark foliage interweaves in one unbroken roof of leaves, underneath whose sloping eaves the shadows hardly move. Beneath some patriarchal tree I lay upon the ground. His hoary arms uplifted he, and all the broad leaves over me clapped their little hands in glee with one continuous sound. A slumberous sound, a sound that brings the feelings of a dream, as of innumerable wings, as when a bell no longer swings. Faint the hollow murmur rings, o'er meadow, lake, and stream. And dreams of that which cannot die, bright visions come to me, as lapped in thought I used to lie and gaze into the summer sky where the sailing clouds went by like ships upon the sea. Dreams that the soul of youth engage, ere fancy has been quelled. Old legends of the monkish age, traditions of the saint and sage, tales that have the rhyme of age, and chronicles of eld. And loving still these quaint old themes, even in the city's throng, I feel the freshness of the streams that, crossed by glades and sunny gleams, water the green land of dreams, the holy land of song. Therefore at Pentecost, which brings the spring clothed like a bride, when nestling buds unfold their wings and bishops' caps have golden rings, musing upon many things, I sought the woodlands wide. The green trees whispered low and mild. It was a sound of joy. They were my playmates when a child, and rocked me in their arms so wild, but they looked at me and smiled as if I were a boy. And ever whispered, mild and low, come be a child once more, and waved their long arms to and fro, and beckoned solemnly and slow, oh, I could not choose but go into the woodlands hoar, into the blithe and breathing air, into the solemn wood, solemn and silent everywhere. Nature with folded hands seemed there, kneeling at her evening prayer. Like one in prayer, I stood. Before me rose an avenue of tall and sombrous pines. Abroad their fan-like branches grew, and where the sunlight darted through, spread a vapor soft and blue in long and sloping lines. And falling on my weary brain like a fast falling shower, the dreams of youth come back again, low lispings of the summer rain dropping in the ripening grain, once upon the flower. Visions of childhood, stay, oh stay, ye were so sweet and wild, and distant voices seemed to say, it cannot be, they pass away, other themes demand the lay, thy lay, thou art no more a child. The land of song within thee lies, watered by living springs. The lids of Fanny's sleepless eyes are grates into that paradise. Holy thoughts like stars arise, its clouds are angels' wings. Learn that henceforth thy song shall be, not mountains capped with snow, no forests surrounding like the sea, nor rivers flowing ceaselessly where the woodlands bend to see the bending heavens below. There is a forest where the din of iron branches sounds, a mighty river roars between, and whoever looks therein sees the heavens all black with sin, sees not its depths nor bounds. Look then into thine heart and write, yes, into life's dream, the deep stream. Longfellow. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just posted over on Facebook a little comment thanking people for hanging out there. We're now live streaming there as well as every place else. Also on YouTube, we've got an active chat room there. There's an active chat over on Facebook. So, yeah, it's social media, but set your security settings. Be careful. But I don't think any of us are going to stop using this any day soon, or most of us anyway. Anyhow, picking up your phone calls, it's Friday the 13th. It's Anything Goes Friday. I like Friday the 13th, frankly. There's I believe, an interesting backstory about it, but it may be apocryphal. I'm going to Google it a little bit during the next break, and then I'll get back with your DuckDuckGo it actually. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Happy Friday the 13th. Yeah, I just wanted to say that this Trump decision to reconsider TPP doesn't surprise me at all, because what I've said from the beginning is Trump's a fraud. He is a neocon. And despite his rhetoric, even if you take him at his word that he's some sort of independent, non-political actor, he would be. I knew he would be under the control of the neocon, the neocons within the so-called establishment in just a matter of time, because he just doesn't have the information. I mean, if you look at this, and you touched on it when you said China produces a lot of our military equipment for us. This is the
they produce the chips, the raw materials that we use to build our military equipment. They don't actually produce our military equipment, but we can't make our military equipment without parts from China.
Well, that's a very important point, because it touches on the corporate nature of all this. And, another example is, in spite of Russia's, technological inferiority or technological disadvantage, they can produce 5 weapons that are near quality of ours for every one that we produce. So, this is...
How do you know that?
Well, I mean, it's just, like I said, my problem with neocons is they have all this information. The TPP is, the TPP was classified for the most part, and that's what bothered me about it. I think that was a neocon, act to make it classified, because I think to reduce the number of people that had real knowledge of the TPP. And
I think you should, Dave, if I may suggest, the neoconservatives are the people who are gung-ho for regime change. They believe that we can make the world safe for a corporate democracy, by the use of violence. I think what you're talking about are neoliberals, and the word liberal is used in the way that it's used in Europe, which means basically we would call it libertarian in the United States, people who believe that there should be no or few restraints on the so-called free market. And neoliberals are the new incarnation of the old libertarian liberals. And what you're describing is neoliberalism, not neoconservatism, respectfully.
Well, neocons do look at a war as a business, and they look at the state as a contributor to the market. They look at the state as a big tool to manipulate the market. And
I see. So you're talking military hardware, and that's why you're talking neocons. I get it now. I'm sorry, Dave.
No, that's okay. I'm just worried about the corporate nature of all this. Mattis has said that he is briefing Trump on the possible consequences of all this. But my main concern is the remarks made by the Russian general military staff that they would attack wherever missiles are launched from. Well, this is the United States of America. We launch missiles from all over the world. All right. And if the Russian general staff is really this committed to defending their position in Syria, I mean, this could escalate to a very, very bad place. I don't think that the American people are really prepared for it. And I definitely know Trump isn't.
I agree, and I think that threat from the Russian military, that if you fire cruise missiles at us from, say, a destroyer out in the Persian Gulf, we will sink your destroyer. And if Russia sinks one of our big ships, we are then at war with Russia, and that could end very, very badly, not just for us, and presumably not just for Russia, but literally for all life on Earth. I mean, nuclear winter is still a real thing. And we need to take this seriously. At the same time, I read, and I commend this to everybody. There's a fascinating piece of reporting in the New York Times right now about the gas attack in Syria. And they've got a number of sources for this. It's very well sourced. It's reported in a very solid way where they're not sure of what they're saying, they come right out and say it, and where they are sure, they come out and say it. And it sure looks to me like this was the Syrian government, which leaves us with the question, what do we do? I mean, the Syrian government is not the only government that's killing its own people. The Burmese government has killed hundreds of thousands of its own people and exiled over 700,000 of the Rohingya. You've got, the Saudi Arabian government kills its own people. They tend to do it with what appears to be rule of law, executions for blasphemy and whatnot. But, Syria is not the only country doing this. Are we going to decide, or at least killing its own people? It's the only country, to the best of my knowledge, gassing its own people. Are we going to, how do we handle this? It seems to me that the only way to handle this is through the United Nations, through a broad multilateral response that speaks specifically to the use of poison gas as an act of war, as a criminal act of war. But this is a very big deal, Dave.
Yeah. Well, I mean, parking 2,000 American soldiers just on the east bank of the Euphrates was a very
inside
feeble
Syria
response.
Right.
Yeah, inside Syria is very feeble. I mean, we have to accept it for what it is. If we don't accept it for what it is, a feeble response, an inept response, then, again, we're just empowering neocon corporate forces over here. And again, I believe the situation is likely to escalate to a level that we're not prepared for.
I agree, and I think it was Colin Powell who said words to the effect of, I don't remember the exact quote, but it was the effect of, if you're going to war, you better plan to win, because anything else is going to hurt you. Any kind of half-assed effort at what looks like war, if it's symbolic or whatever, if you're not prepared to fight all the way to the end and win this thing, and in the case of a nuclear war, there are no winners. If you're not prepared to do that, then get out of the arena. And Trump is far more interested in symbolic gestures that placate his base. And those symbolic gestures, like throwing a half a dozen missiles into Syria, if one of them hits a Russian military installation or even hits a Russian military advisor, we could find ourselves in the early stages of World War III faster than you can say, Jack Swift or whatever. And that could be a really, really dangerous thing. Dave, thanks for the call. It's good to hear from you. Andy in Lansing, Illinois. Hey, Andy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hi. I was just talking with a buddy of mine, Sean, and we have opposite views. He has liberal views. I have more conservative views, and I just, when discussing things like sanctuary cities, border, I just don't understand the liberal point of view. And
you want to talk about sanctuary cities then? I mean, we can just pick any one topic you'd like and dig into it. What's your understanding of what a sanctuary city is, Andy?
Well, the sanctuary city, what it is, and at least what California is doing, it's not really so much the word sanctuary city that I have a problem with. I mean, it's really about the fact that they're not cooperating with ICE. When these criminals are going to get out of jail, they're not cooperating with ICE. So that's
so what does my understanding is that the whole concept of sanctuary cities, which by the way is more of a slur put together by the right, but the concept, and again, you have the Republican mayor of San Diego supporting this. The concept is that if a person calls the police to report a crime, or if a person is stopped by the police because they have a taillight out or because they've committed a crime, that the federal crime of being in this country without a visa or without citizenship is not enforced by local or state police officers, that it's enforced by federal officers. And the upside of that is that, as I said earlier, if somebody is in this country illegally and they're living here and they're working here, and they see their next door neighbor's house getting broken into, and they call 911 and the police come over and interview them as the witness, or even take them to court as the witness, they're not going to get deported. So they're extremely likely to participate with law enforcement in helping things out. Similarly, if their car gets stopped by the police for a taillight out, they're less likely to have a shootout with the police because they know they're going to get deported, or, frankly, more commonly, they're less likely to run away before the police get there or whatever. In terms of cooperating with ICE, if ICE comes into a city with an arrest warrant for somebody, the police will take them to their house. If you've got a federal warrant against somebody, there's no police department in the country that won't cooperate with ICE. But that's a federal crime, and a federal officer comes in, they get cooperation from cities everywhere, including San Francisco. This police don't cooperate with ICE thing is a lie. It's, this is one of these, Fox News memes. The cooperation that they don't provide ICE is they don't call ICE. If somebody says, hey, my neighbor is broken into, and the police show up and say, well, show me your passport, and they say, I don't have one, at that point, the police don't call ICE. Police don't even ask the question. That's what Fox News is characterizing as, quote, not cooperating with ICE. And it's making people less safe because it's causing immigrants to refuse to report crimes. And it could be a crime against you, Andy. Andy, I'm sorry we're out of time. I got a boogie. We'll be right back.
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls after this. It's Anything Goes here on Friday the 13th. And welcome back. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about this idea of God and guns, not gods and guns, but God and guns. I see it on Facebook, and I just think it is so decadent, it is so wrong, and it's antithetical to anybody who has a true understanding of Christianity, like Reverend Larson. And he was interviewed. He was with MLK. MLK really abhorred violence of any sort, even though, he believed in resistance. He did not believe in violence, and that was why he was so successful. That's why Gandhi was so successful. And he felt that the role of the Christian is to be an activist. You love your family, you love your parishioners, and then you go on and you do more, whatever you can do, and so violence is a waste of money. It is destroying the very fabric of our society and other societies that we are, I think, at this point, one of the biggest purveyors of violence. And it's really interesting that when Martin Luther King said that in Manhattan in 1967 on April 4th, 1 year later, he was dead. He was assassinated. I don't know what that actually means, but it does definitely look as if he knew he was going to die. How he knew that, I don't know. But
he was receiving death threats daily, and he was aware that there were people raising money to kill him and trying to.
Well, I mean, constantly from the FBI. Or somebody hired by the FBI, by J. Edgar Hoover, by various people within this government. So we are, here is the person who was advocating nonviolence, dead. At the age of 37.
Something like
39.
That. Yeah. John, I think that the other point to make about this, whenever you hear somebody or any of us hear anybody talking about God and guns, is somewhat over 90%. I'm not sure the exact percentage, but I know it's over 90% of Americans who identify as being religious, identify as being Christian. So you can generally safely, or Jewish, actually even Muslim, Islam recognizes Jesus, as a great prophet. And I think most Jews, recognize Jesus as, a guy who said some really good stuff that they don't disagree with.
Right.
And so the question would be really kind of a two-part. Number one, who would Jesus shoot, or who would Jesus recommend you shoot? And number two, hey, do you remember what happened when Peter got really angry because the centurions came to arrest Jesus? and he pulled out his sword and he cut off the ear of one of the centurions. What did Jesus say about that? Because if Peter had a gun, he would have used that instead of the sword. What did Jesus say about that? I'm sure you remember, John.
Oh, he said, "Get behind me, Satan," is what he said.
Right, and he healed Peter's ear, as I recall.
Right, but unfortunately, this meme or this idea of violence associated with religion and holy war is just, allowed to be said with no contradiction, I mean.
So start contradicting it wherever you see it. Just ask, who would Jesus shoot? Which kind of gun would Jesus choose? And then put the quote from, I think is it Matthew or Luke, where Jesus heals the Peter's ear. Frankly, I don't remember. It's been a lot of years, but John, thank you. Good to hear from you. We'll be right back. So welcome back. Last night, Louise and I went to, we're here at the Mass Torts Made Perfect conference, Mike Papantonio's conference, and it's basically trial lawyers from all over the country who get together, mostly lawyers who litigate against big companies that are ripping people off or killing people. It's an amazing thing. And last night, they had Whoopi Goldberg come in and do the entertainment. And I was just blown away. I've never seen Whoopi live. I've never met her. I'm not sure I know anybody who knows her even, or at least I've never had a conversation with anybody who knows her. And I always just, thought of her as that woman who's a brilliant actress, a brilliant comedian, and On The View, I guess is the name of the show. And, and she's just done some spectacular movies. So I've always, respected her, but I had no idea. She did about a 15, maybe 20-minute little comedy riff, and then she took questions to the audience for like 40 minutes. And what a decent human being. I was just blown away by what an extraordinarily decent human being Whoopi Goldberg is. It's completely changed my understanding of her. Well, not, or added to it, let's say, because I didn't think she wasn't decent. But that's absolutely remarkable. Scott in Chicago, it's Anything Goes Friday. What's on your mind, Scott? You want to talk about Syria?
Yes, I've long known that the Republicans are off the rails, but it seems the Democrats are getting that way too.
How so?
I'd like to know your sources that say that Assad committed this chemical attack, because that would be insane. I've heard a lot of lies about Assad, but now he's insane.
Well, the New York Times report did not say that it was the Syrian military. What they said was that it was forces allied with the Syrian military. I'm not sure exactly what that means. But my source, Scott, was the New York Times. And the New York Times lists their sources in the article, and I encourage you to read it. I realize the New York Times cheerleaded us into the war in Iraq.
Into the war in Iraq, yes. The New York Times.
I get that, yeah.
Yeah.
I get that, and I'm not calling for America. As I said, Scott, stop for a minute. I'm not calling for America to go in and take out Assad. I'm not calling for America. That would start World War III. That would start a war with Russia. That would be crazy. And I'm not calling for America to do, frankly, anything right now other than bring together an international coalition, investigate what happened, and, if appropriate, do something about it. But anybody using chemical weapons after they've been long banned by the UN and by an international treaty that bans the use and even the stockpiling of them these days by most countries, needs to have some sort of a response. Not the response that the neocons want, obviously. But Scott, if you're trying to portray me as some sort of irrational neocon, you're wrong.
You are.
I beg your pardon?
I'm farther left than you are. I'm no neocon.
Okay.
I think that
Scott, I'm not going to do name calling with you. John in Jeffersonville, Ohio. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
What's on my mind is it has to do with a strategy comment that I'd like to get from you. And it seems to me like the only thing that the Republican Party has going for it is money. If you look at all the issues, the Democrats and the progressives have the issues. And I love that we have so many different issues, but it would seem to me like if we coalesced around getting money out of politics, it would let enough air out of the balloon so that all the other issues would benefit from that. But it seems like we don't coalesce around that one thing to get the a maximum amount of benefit. And I'm just curious what your comments would be on that.
I absolutely agree with you, John, and which is why I have supported MoveToAmend.org for well over a decade. In fact, I was part of the group that helped start Move to Amend. I wasn't there for the birthing meeting, but I was there for several subsequent meetings, and actually several meetings prior to that with people who were putting this together. And that was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, somewhere between 99 and actually I think it was around 2001. And it was at Jonathan Friedman's house in San Rafael. And so I totally agree with you. And I've had some fascinating conversations with Republican politicians over the years. They won't come on my program. Every single one of these conversations has happened at a cocktail party or a meeting, and where they have told me, and more than one has told me, if the Democrats can hit a critical threshold where they can get a constitutional amendment before Congress, to send out to the states to ratify or to ratify after the states have done it, a constitutional amendment saying that corporations are not people and money is not speech, which is what would take money out of politics. It requires an amendment to the Constitution. If the Democrats can hit that critical mass, I remember one guy saying to me, I would vote for that in a heartbeat, but I would never tell anybody that until the day of the vote, because these Republicans are so beholden to billionaires and big money interests, corporate interests and billionaire interests, that the minute that they even hint that they might support cutting off their supporters, basically, who they understand own them, they understand have bought them, they're afraid to say it. But they will vote for it because Republicans hate the fact, just like Democrats hate it, that they have to spend literally 4 or 5 hours every business day off premises, outside the office buildings of the House and Senate, in a rented room, calling rich people and begging for money. Everybody hates that. It's very popular in D.C., and we've got to make it happen, John. Thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Elaine Pagel's book, The Gnostic Gospels. This is from chapter 3, God the Father, God the Mother. Unlike many of his contemporaries among the deities of the ancient Near East, the God of Israel shared his power with no female divinity, nor was he the divine husband or lover of any. He can scarcely be characterized in any but masculine epithets: king, lord, master, judge, and father. Indeed, the absence of feminine symbolism for God marks Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in striking contrast to the world's other religious traditions. Whether in Egypt, Babylonia, Greece, and Rome, or in Africa, India, and North America, which abound in female symbolism. Jewish, Christian, and Islamic theologians today are quick to point out that God is not to be considered in sexual terms at all, yet the actual language they use daily in worship and prayer conveys a completely different message. Who, growing up Jewish or Christian tradition, has escaped the distinct impression that God is masculine? And while Catholics revere Mary as the mother of Jesus, they never identify her as divine in her own right. If she is the mother of God, she is not God the Mother, on an equal footing with God the Father. Christianity, of course, added the Trinitarian terms to the Jewish description of God, yet of the three divine persons, two, the Father and the Son, are described in masculine terms, and the third, the Spirit, suggests the sexlessness of the Greek neuter term for spirit, pneuma. Whoever investigates the early history of Christianity, the field called patristics, that is, study of the fathers of the church, will be prepared for the passage that concludes the Gospel of Thomas. Simon Peter said to the disciples, "Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life." Jesus said, "I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman will make herself male, who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven." End of quote from the Gospel of Thomas. Strange as it sounds, this simply states what religious rhetoric assumes, that the men form the legitimate body of the community while women are allowed to participate only when they assimilate themselves to men. Other texts discovered at Nag Hammadi demonstrate one striking difference between these heretical sources and the orthodox ones. Gnostic sources continually use sexual symbolism to describe God. One might expect that these texts would show the influence of archaic pagan traditions of the mother goddess, but for the most part, their language is specifically Christian, unmistakably related to a Jewish heritage. Yet instead of describing a monastic and masculine God, many of these texts speak of God as a dyad who embraces both masculine and feminine elements. One group of Gnostic sources claims to have received a secret tradition from Jesus through James and through Mary Magdalene. Members of this group prayed to both the Divine Father and Mother. Quote, "From thee, Father, and through thee, Mother, the two immortal names, parents of the divine being, and thou, dweller in heaven, humanity, of the mighty name." The end of the quote from the prayer. Other texts indicate that the authors had wondered to whom a single masculine God proposed, quote, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness," in Genesis 1:26. Since the Genesis account goes on to say that humanity was created, quote, "male and female," some concluded that the God in whose image we are made must also be both masculine and feminine, both father and mother. How do these texts characterize the Divine Mother? I find no simple answer, since the texts themselves are extremely diverse. Yet we may sketch out three primary characterizations. In the first place, several Gnostic groups describe the Divine Mother as part of an original couple. Valentinius, the teacher and poet, begins with the premise that God is essentially indescribable. But he suggests that the divine can be imagined as a dyad, consisting in one part of the ineffable, the depth, the primal father, and in the other of grace, silence, the womb, and mother of all. Valentinius reasons that silence is the appropriate complement of the father, designating the former as feminine and latter as masculine because of the grammatical gender of the Greek words. He goes on to describe how silence receives, as in a womb, the seed of the ineffable source. From this she brings forth all the emanations of a divine being, ranged in harmonious pairs of masculine and feminine energies. Followers of Valentinius prayed to her for protection as the mother and as the mystical eternal silence. For example, Marcus, the magician, invokes her as grace, in Greek the feminine term charis. Quote, "May she who is before all things, the incomprehensible and indescribable grace, fill you within and increase in you her own knowledge." End of quote from the Gospels. In his secret celebration of the Mass, Marcus teaches that the wine symbolizes her blood. As the cup of wine is offered, he prays that grace may flow into all who drink it. A prophet and visionary, Marcus calls himself the womb and recipient of silence, as she is of the Father. The visions he received of the divine being appeared, he reports, in female form. Another Gnostic writing, called the Great Announcement, quoted by Hippolytus in his Refutation of All Heresies, explains the origin of the universe as follows. Quote, "From the power of silence appeared a great power, the mind of the universe, which manages all things, and is a male. The other, a great intelligence, is a female which produces all things." Following the gender of the Greek words for mind and intelligence, this author explains that these powers joined in union and are discovered to be in duality. The book, The Gnostic Gospels, by Elaine Pagels.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour. It's Anything Goes Friday, taking your calls. I just want to bring you up to date on a few things. Yesterday, the news from yesterday, you know, today it's early, but it's rolling along. But just one day, we learned that Trump might have knocked up his housekeeper. Now, she's denying it, but David Pecker's company, American Media Inc., I think it's called, which owns the National Enquirer, paid her $30,000 to keep her mouth shut. Or, you know, they paid her for the story, and then they decided not to run the story because they thought it wasn't credible. But the effect is basically, you know, keep your mouth shut, because she had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Or she signed over all rights to them, and so if she uses the story in any other context. So, you know, let's say that it actually isn't true, that Trump's doorman is simply, you know, a lying big mouth, which is what they're asserting. Just the fact that American media would pay $30,000 to stop this story tells you that American media and David Pecker think it might be true, or it could have been true, or hey, you know, Donald Trump is certainly capable of that. And this is the thing that really stuck James Comey. You know, he writes about it in his new book, A Higher Loyalty. And in the book, he talks about how Trump, in one of his first meetings with Trump, or one of his early meetings with Trump, Trump, unprompted, went into a long rant about how he would never hire prostitutes to pee on the bed that Michelle and Barack Obama slept in, because he's a germaphobe. Come on. Any guy who brags about grabbing women by the crotch is not afraid of germs associated with that part of the body. Any guy who's having unprotected sex with both Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels, you know, a Playboy model, okay. A porn star, you know, not to say that porn stars are nasty and yucky, but they do have sex with a lot of people. And yes, I realize they get tested all the time and all that, but still, anybody who's a germaphobe, you would think would be pretty hysterical about even the idea of that. No, Trump jumped at it. Trump worked at it. Plus, urine is sterile. You know, Mahatma Gandhi drank a glass of his own urine every morning as his morning ritual his entire life. It's a common thing in some countries. It's, you know, it's got strong antifungal properties. As Madonna pointed out, if you pee in the shower, you don't get athlete's foot. Yeah, there's actually some science behind that. So, you know, Trump saying this is just like, nobody's buying this. And the fact that and the point that Comey made, and I think this is the really big and important one, was that, you know, if somebody said to Comey's wife, your husband had some hookers when he was in Moscow or when he was in, you know, Finland or whatever, his wife would have said, no way. My husband wouldn't do that. You know, what, sleep with hookers? Are you kidding? So just the fact that Trump's rationale was, if Melania even believes this 1%, it's going to hurt her. That was his rationale. That's what he told Comey. And Comey was thinking, wait a minute, your wife thinks there's a 1% chance you sleep with hookers? My wife thinks it's a 0% chance, Comey says. So this is like, it speaks to Donald Trump's character. But the other thing that nobody is talking about, but I'll talk about, because I think that it's probably the real issue here, is that with both of his previous wives, with Ivana and with Marla Maples, Donald Trump, Ivana, I think her last name was Knudsen, with Ivana and Marla, he had prenuptials. And the prenuptial, we know with Marla, we don't know the details of the Ivana one, but she was with him for some time, you know, produced 3 children. But the one with Marla said that they had to be true to each other for 4 years. And after that, it didn't matter. But if either one of them wanted to, you know, hurt the other financially in terms of the prenup, then they had to be true to each other for 4 years. And a few months short of that 4th year, Marla had an affair with her bodyguard or her ski instructor or something. It was somebody that was close to her on a regular basis. Trump found out about it because presumably he was constantly spying on her. And he used that to cut out her chunk of what she would have gotten under the prenup. And so she ended up with just a relatively small amount of money compared to how much Trump had. Just, you know, it was $1 million or a few $1 million. And he's been estranged basically from her and from her daughter Tiffany, who never shows up around the White House. His daughter from his second marriage. Actually, he got Marla pregnant while he was still married to Ivana, his first wife. But in any case, he started his affair with her anyway while he was still married to Ivana. But this is how he did it with his first 2 wives. So presumably with Melania, he's got the same kind of prenup that says, you know, if either one of us are unfaithful in the first 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever it may be of the marriage, then all these promises of how much money you get if you stay with me as my wife or husband go away. And so the bottom line here is, and I think this is really what is motivating Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is motivated. Of course, he wants to be loved by everybody. But in terms of his wives, the thing that motivates him obviously is money. In fact, in terms of everything, the thing that motivates him is money. By the way, when he became president, he had 18 companies that were paying him to use his name. He had Trump steaks, Trump games, Trump board games, Trump shoes, Trump shirts, Trump everything, right? 18 companies. He's down now to 2. And one is in Panama and the other is in Turkey. 2 kind of hardline regimes, repressive regimes where, you know, the Trump name probably isn't as bad as it is here. But anyhow, so I think that what Trump is trying to hide, I don't think he's trying to avoid hurting Melania. I think he's trying to avoid hurting himself financially. And I think personally that he is, frankly, that he is so deep in the hole to the banksters and the oligarchs for rescuing his empire after his series of bankruptcies in the 90s. I think he's so deep in the hole to those people that he can't afford a large settlement if Melania decides to leave him and take him for everything that she can, because he's broken the prenup. So anyhow, I think that that's what's going on. But so number one, we learned that he might have knocked up his housekeeper. Number two, this is a list from Democrats since birth over at DU. Number two, we learned that the Trump team is trying to undermine James Comey. I guess we've known that all along. Trying to undermine Rod Rosenstein, not a new thing. We learned yesterday that John Kelly, this is in Trump's book, said that Trump is dishonorable. Now that that's in the book, how long is Kelly going to be the chief of staff? We learned that Trump is probably going to refuse to have an interview with Robert Mueller, and which is changing Mueller's strategy. He's speeding up the timeline now for bringing a report to Congress about crimes that Trump may have committed that might constitute impeachable offenses. And I will add, by the way, I don't believe that the Republicans will impeach him. These guys, Trump is the one who is championing tax cuts for billionaires. He's the one that's championing policies that help billionaires. He doesn't care if it hurts farmers. As long as it's helping the billionaires, Trump's down with it. So and the Republicans, of course, are all owned by billionaires. Pretty much every Republican in the House and Senate is a wholly owned subsidiary of the billionaire class. And now he's talking about reversing his stance on TPP. Now that was something that he said to some red state senators who are interested in growing things, right? And China has strategically targeted our grain exports. So he said it to a small group of senators, and they went out and talked to the press. This wasn't Trump announcing this. I think he was just lying to them like he does to everybody else, trying to placate them. I don't think he has any intention of reviving or joining the TPP.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And we learned yesterday that James Comey thinks that Trump is basically a mobster, that he uses the same practices and techniques that the mafia uses. Welcome back. Tazio in Ithaca, New York. Am I saying your name right?
Yeah, you're saying it right. Call me whenever you want.
Great, sure, that's fine.
Hello,
Thanks
Mr.
for
Hartman.
watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
You got it. First, I want to tell you that I work at a community college with a lot of kids who haven't been back or people that haven't been back in 10 or 15 years, and your hunter-farmer method is just giving me something to think about in my daily life. But what I wanted to talk about is something that happened all the weekend that all those 7-Elevens got raided. Something happened in my town, Ithaca, which is supposed to be a sanctuary city. An unmarked van.
This was several months ago, right?
Yeah, this is several months ago. An unmarked van pulled up in the parking lot of a Thai restaurant that I used to work in, and they took two people out of the back, out of the kitchen, and they took them down to the DSS, or they took them away. I don't know where ICE took them. It was ICE. We found out later that was in the newspaper. And then the other weekend, when there was a protest, for a gun, because all the kids getting killed.
For gun control, yeah. The Never Again movement.
Exactly. That same van was in the parking lot, and there was a couple of people with, dressed in all black with those little earbuds in coming out of their ears. So, I don't know, we're supposed to be a sanctuary city, but there's ICE hanging around. That's my piece.
The confusion is the definition of sanctuary city. If you think that the definition of sanctuary city is what Fox News says it is, then the local police would have kept ICE out. But Fox News is lying through their teeth. The definition of a sanctuary city is that the local police will not do federal crime enforcement. They will turn criminals over to the feds if they become aware, of the crime, but they try to go out of their way not to become aware of immigration crimes. Now, I'm not sure that they go out of their way. They just don't ask those questions. So if the feds come in to a sanctuary city to enforce federal law, police aren't going to stop them.
What it said in the newspaper was the mayor and the police weren't notified.
Sure.
So
they don't need to be. It's feds. It's federal law. That's not uncommon at all, by the way. If the FBI is going to take down a crime boss, very often they don't contact the local police, in particular with a crime boss, because the local cops might have been corrupted by the mafia. But, any kind of federal prosecutions, they don't need local police. They've got more than enough federal police. And that has nothing to do
Yeah,
with sanctuary city or not.
All right. Well, that's my piece. I know you got other callers.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Tazio. It's nice to hear from you. This is the unfortunate reality is that because right-wing hate radio, right-wing media, principally internet media, although there is a right-wing newspaper in D.C. as well, and probably in other cities, paid for by a billionaire, and Fox, so-called news, because this right-wing media has so demonized any city that says, or for that matter, any state that says, state policing, local policing, it's about enforcing state laws and local laws. That's what we do. That's what we always did. We are not here to enforce federal laws. If the feds want to enforce federal laws, they are perfectly welcome to do it. That's their purview. That's their charge. That's their legal right, their ability. And because people don't understand what sanctuary city means, it's just a slur from the hard right. They get confused when things happen like ICE shows up and arrests people. ICE has the ability to do that anywhere in America, sanctuary city or not. We'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann radio and TV program. Welcome back, Ron, in Berrien Springs, Michigan. Ron, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I'd like to talk about the immigrants that we welcomed to this country after the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese, and especially they settled in Orange County, California, the Republican stronghold. And their leader was two of the most corrupt officials in Vietnam, South Vietnam, who looted their country before they ran away from their country after the Vietnamese victory. And
by the way, if I may interject, Ron, this should not surprise us. We propped up a corrupt regime in South Vietnam that did not even have the support of its own citizens. We murdered several of the people who didn't go along with what we wanted. I mean, this was Nixon's shtick. And frankly, LBJ's before that. Those guys were looting their country. They were doing it throughout their presidencies for all the years that we were fighting the Vietnam War and supporting them. And when they collapsed, and when the country collapsed, when we left, they were the people that we had been supporting, so we brought them over to the United States. And the fact that they're corrupt here shouldn't surprise anybody. They were corrupt there to begin with and supported largely by Republicans, which is why, I'm guessing, which is why they went to Orange County, which is a Republican stronghold. Back to you, Ron.
Exactly right. And also they perpetrated on their own people a pyramid scam, if you will, of we're going to reinvade Vietnam and take it away from the Vietnamese people. And it never happened. It was just a scam to loot their own people, which they, of course, they had no choice in the matter because they were under a mafia-like control by the right-wing military that also was brought over with them. But now they are engaging in racism and denying the rights of immigrants coming from South and Central America, the same rights that they had. In fact, these people had much more rights because they were part of the right-wing conspiracy. But it's just so sickening now that these people who, like we both agree, were total cowards and traitors. Now they're bringing their treason, their racism, and their hatred to this country. It is just
how specifically are they doing this, Ron?
Through they're part of the anti-sanctuary movement in California, and they're also I'm sure trying any way they can to, if they can locate immigrants from South and Central America, to turn them in.
Yeah. Ha-Joon Chang is a South Korean economist, and he wrote a brilliant book called Pulling the Ladder Up. And it was basically about how poor countries become wealthy countries by engaging in protectionism, and then they fight other countries engaging in protectionism in order to maintain their status. But it's the exact same thing. What you're talking about is pulling the ladder up. These guys, they're saying, we got ours, we don't want to dilute it, we don't want to share with anybody else. you know, to hell with the rest of the people. And it's a classic conservative
one final point,
worldview.
One final point, if I may.
Go.
And also, through my reading, the participation of the South Korean government by allowing their military, the ROC military, to come into South Vietnam, and they were some of the most brutal, and they carried out some of the most atrocious atrocities in Vietnam. That is how the Korean government was allowed, or their payback after their participation in Vietnam was huge investments by the United States, which allowed them to become one of the wonders of the world with their economic wonders and freedoms. So that's another.
Well, that was General Park. He came to power in 1965 in a military coup. Park Chung-hee, I think was his name, and
who was also.
Go ahead, Ron. Oh, I think we lost Ron. Anyhow, yeah, General Park was was a hardcore right-winger. He put into place, by the way, to his credit, and this is, not to support military dictatorships, but when General Park became president of South Korea in 1965, when he did the military coup and overthrew the existing civilian government, and maintained that, I believe, until the mid-'70s. I'm not sure how long it was, frankly, until South Korea actually had a democratic election. But when he came in, the GDP of South Korea, the per capita income of South Korea was the same as Kenya, and which was in the neighborhood of less than $100 a year was the annual income. The two principal exports of South Korea in 1965 were human hair for wigs and fish. That was it. And the big companies that Samsung, for example, their principal business was exporting fish and vegetables. And Park said, enough of this. We are going to lock down our economy. He put high tariffs on imports. He subsidized domestic industries. He created the equivalent of the Japanese MITI, the Ministry of Industry and Trade, and helped subsidize Samsung, helped subsidize a bunch of South Korean companies. And over the next decade and a half, South Korea went from having a GDP similar to that of Kenya to having a GDP or a per capita income similar to that of Kenya, to having a per capita income similar to that of the United States or Japan, just slightly below, 20–30% below. And it was, as Mr. Chang, who wrote Pulling the Ladder Up, about this situation, in a brilliant economics book. He's a brilliant economist. I believe he's at Cambridge now. He's been on this program before. As he wrote, he said it was like Kenya turning into Switzerland in less than 2 decades. It was a radical transformation, and it was the same kind of transformation the United States went through when Alexander Hamilton put into place high import tariffs, export subsidies, subsidies for domestic manufacture, and a Buy America rule. And South Korea had a Buy South Korea rule that applied to their military, and they also had strong social incentives. People were discouraged from using any foreign product and were basically shamed for doing it. Sort of like we were with foreign cars in the 60s and 70s.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So setting aside the military dictatorship part of it, South Korea offers some really, really important lessons for the United States right now.
Today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from a book by an old acquaintance and colleague of mine, Alan Colmes, who passed away this last year. The book is called Thank the Liberals. You're a liberal. If you think you're a conservative, that assertion is surely quite shocking. You may even be so upset upon reading this that you're considering either throwing this book down, shooting a hole in it with your shotgun, or even worse, burning it the way Florida Pastor Terry Jones burned the Koran. Or you may feel the need to toss this book aside even temporarily and find solace in your Bible. However, that's a fairly liberal book too, so it may not help you get any more comfortable than this one will.
The very fact that you haven't done any of these things yet shows how open-minded you are. So don't disappoint and go all Terry Jones on me here. If right now you're saying, but Alan, there's no way I'm a liberal, just do me the favor of hearing me out. Exhibit A to prove my point that you're a liberal, maybe in conservative clothing, is that you're an American. If you're not an American, keep reading. You'll discover how great it is to be one. As an American, you're free right now to put this book down. Go outside for a walk, take a drive, or head to the nearest airport and fly anywhere in the world. Or you can stay home, go online, and get almost any information you want without it being firewalled by the government. And that's largely because liberals have stood up against such regulations as the Stop Online Piracy Act and the Protect IP Act, SOPA and PIPA, that would have squelched free speech on the internet and made criminals out of innocent content providers. This doesn't mean the government hasn't already overreached. When the government knows what websites you're going to because of the very unpatriotic Patriot Act, they're likely not paying too much attention to you and won't do anything about it. You want to leave your job, start a business, go to a food court, gorge out, just goof off. This is the land of the free, so go ahead after you're done with this book. America was founded on a liberal idea. The concept of a representative democracy without a state religion was a move leftward from the motherland, where the Church of England dictated certain laws and mores. Our forefathers thought that a state religion was repressive, and so they established one of our key tenets, freedom of and from religion. There can be no religious test to hold public office in America. That's liberal. A commander-in-chief who's a civilian, not a member of the military, it's liberal. Taxation with representation, that's liberal. A tripartite form of government where no one branch can rule over the others, yep, that's liberal too. Our founders, the ones conservatives revere so much, took these very liberal ideas and made them so much a part of our DNA that America is unthinkable without them. Let's look at some of the parts of our founding documents that often don't get enough press, but show how liberal we are simply because we're American. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution lays out the rights of Congress, stating in part that they have the right to, quote, lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, end quote. But the government is specifically charged with providing for the general welfare of our population has been much disputed by conservatives. Over time, liberals have fought for numerous items that fall in this category that have greatly benefited Americans, programs conservatives forgot they initially opposed. You'll read about them later in the chapter, Have You Thanked a Liberal Today? Article 1, Section 8 also guarantees your right to your personal intellectual property by saying that Congress has the right to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited time to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. If you invent something or write something, it's not the property of the government. This is why entrepreneurs and scientists flock to America. They know that here they are free to create and they will get the credit they deserve for their work. Our founding documents established a court system giving us a way to seek redress from grievances. The Constitution establishes the creation of various courts available for different purposes depending on the issue at hand. Congress has the authority to create bankruptcy courts and tax courts to handle specific issues. Article 3 says the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as Congress may from time to time ordain and establish, giving us a federal court system and an appeals process. Article 1, Section 9 gives us the right to seek relief from unlawful imprisonment. A prisoner or someone on his or her behalf can petition for a writ of habeas corpus, an order from the government that it has the right to detain the person in question. This protects us from being held arbitrarily by the state without evidence and without just cause. Our entire judicial system outlined in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of our Constitution, is built on a liberal idea. The focus is on protecting the individual, especially the minority, from the tyranny of the majority. For example, the presumption of innocence, which is implied by the right to remain silent and the right to a jury, places the burden of proof on the prosecutor. The Fifth Amendment calls for grand juries to protect us from being prosecuted when there isn't enough evidence to bring a case against us. This amendment also guarantees that we can't be tried for the same crime twice and that we are protected from having to testify against ourselves. This was originally written to guard against torture and forced confessions. Most important, we can't be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. If charged with a crime, there is a process in place to guarantee us a fair trial. This includes being given adequate notice to prepare a defense against those charges. The Fifth Amendment also contains the promise that the government can't take our property away without just compensation. We probably take all this for granted, but that's probably because we've never lived in a country where a terrifying knock on the door at 3 a.m. could mean a phony trial in a kangaroo court or a demand that we leave our homes because someone from the government needs or wants them.
The Sixth Amendment continues the discussion of our judicial system through the promise that anyone accused of committing a crime has a right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of peers in the jurisdiction where the alleged crime was committed. You have the right to be told the charges against you, to confront your accuser in court, to have witnesses on your behalf, and to have counsel represent you. Thank the Liberals by Alan Paul.
Oh, no, that's the stick receiver. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And you can hear me, Sean, right? Yes? Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome back. Let's pick up your calls here. It's Anything Goes Friday. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to offer my view on why I don't think Trump possibly could have fathered the child of the housekeeper in Trump Tower. That is because he would have had to spend up to a full minute thinking of someone other than himself, and I don't think he's capable. Take care.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mike. That's a good one. Mike, from Mike to Mike. Mike in Milwaukee. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? I got two quick questions and a quick statement. The statement is, a caller called yesterday and was happy that Paul Ryan was leaving, but wondered what was taking him so long. And of course, he lied and said he want to give the Congress off in good hands in January. But the reason is, if he left today, we will have to pay him $75,000 for the rest of his life for his pension. But if he held the speakership for 3 years, which in January it will be, it'll get bumped up to $220,000 or something like that. So that's the reason he's sticking around, because he want all that money. Yeah. And so my question is, you spoke about VPNs earlier this week, and I want to know, is that like a circumvention around Google and they data mining, or is it like a fraud protection thing? Because I heard on Sirius they offer, like, for $99 you can get 3 years on 6 devices. So I just wanted you to just let us know what exactly VPNs are. And then the other question I have is, I was watching the NBA game the other day, and the announcer, a much older white guy, older than you, a white guy, but the athlete did something spectacular, and he was just like, wait a cotton picking minute or something like that. And everybody was going in on Twitter about that phrase. So could you kind of like give us some historical context on that phrase? Because I've used it before, but never knew what it was, never knew what it meant. And that was it.
Yeah, sure. Well, with regard to cotton picking, I don't know what it means other than, I heard that when I was a kid. I think it's an anachronistic phrase, a phrase like from the 50s and 60s. But it's not inconceivable. I grew up white in a white community, so and in rural Michigan, I heard it. It's entirely, from white relatives and friends. It's entirely possible that it was a reference to black people in the South picking cotton. But I've never heard anybody say, wait an N-word minute or anything like that. So I'm not, I think it's kind of a stretch, frankly, but who knows? Maybe somebody can call in who knows more about it than I do. I have no idea. With regard to VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. And the way it works is, say that if you connect yourself to your local internet service provider, say you've got Comcast as your service provider, as most people in America do, it seems. When you connect your computer to Comcast through a router, or even your phone is going through AT&T or Verizon or whatever, everything you do on your computer is visible to that internet service provider, right down to moving your mouse around on the screen and touching the keyboard. Literally everything you do, every keyword, every password you type in, even if you think it's encrypted, every transaction with your bank, every email you send or receive, every text message or every private message that you send or receive, all of it is 100% transparently visible to your internet service provider. So number one, if you don't trust your internet service provider, and now that they've destroyed net neutrality, the internet service providers legally can not only look at that, they can record all of it. And from when we see what Google and Facebook have done with all of our data, that doesn't seem all that far-fetched anymore. So number one. And number two It then passes through that internet service provider's network to get to, the other end, and all those relay stations in between, all those backbone providers, which are other internet service providers, people that you've never heard of because they only do basically kind of wholesale internet, the L4s of the world, these big companies that run the giant backbones, they can see everything that's going on as well. And then, of course, when it gets to whoever you're talking to, if, say, you're looking at your Facebook page, they, of course, can see everything you're doing. Now, a VPN doesn't stop Facebook from seeing everything you're doing. You wouldn't want it to, because then your passwords wouldn't make their way to Facebook or to Google or to whatever. But if you want to stop that, if you want to block your local internet service provider, or if you're on a hotel Wi-Fi system like I am right now, if you want to block anybody else who's on that Wi-Fi system who has any good knowledge of how to program and how to code and how to hack, from looking at everybody else who's using the network and monitoring everything they're doing and stealing their passwords, whether it's their email password or their bank password. If you want to stop that, then you hook up with a VPN provider, a virtual private network provider. And the way it works is you get an app. I use one called TunnelBear, but there's a bunch of them out there, and TunnelBear is not probably the very best, but it's solid and reliable. You pay for it. I pay a couple bucks a month for it. And it allows me to use it on my computer, Louise's computer, both our phones. And I don't know what the maximum number of users is. Typically, it's 4, 6, or 10. It depends on what you're paying for. And what happens is that app on my computer is encrypting absolutely everything I do. And then, so all of my communications with the rest of and it takes that data and takes it to wherever TunnelBear has their servers. And it looks like they're in St. Louis, but I'm not sure. It takes it to that place and then dumps it into the large internet without any of these local internet service providers. AT&T can't see it, Verizon can't see it, Comcast can't see it. Whoever this hotel uses as an internet service provider, if they try to monitor my stream, or if anybody has hacked the local hotel service and they're looking at everybody who's using the hotel service, all they see is a stream of gibberish because it's encrypted. And then at the other end, they de-encrypt it and they dump it into the internet. So you following me so far, Mike?
It sounds like it's a good thing, what I'm hearing so far.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's an excellent thing, and it's a real safe thing, and it's a good thing. There's one caveat that I want to add, though. If you understand the process that I've just described, and that is that an internet service provider, when you put a VPN on your iPhone, because Apple's very concerned about security, you put a VPN on your iPhone, and you will get a warning from Apple that says your VPN provider can see everything you're doing. Because when my data gets to TunnelBear's dump into the internet in St. Louis, assuming that that's where it is, they've got a little map that shows you where it is. And in fact, I can VPN with TunnelBear into Germany. In fact, when I was in Germany, I VPN'd into the United States. So it looked to the people in the United States like my data was coming from St. Louis instead of from Germany. When I was in Cuba, I VPN'd into, using TunnelBear, I VPN'd into the United States, so it looked like my data was coming from the United States. But if TunnelBear was an unscrupulous company, if they were rip-off artists, then they, like I said, they have access to everything I'm seeing too. Now, the user agreement with them and the contract with them says that they don't do that, and I trust them not to do that. But there are companies out there who represent themselves as VPNs, as virtual private networks, who are less than reputable. And so you want to make sure, if you are buying a VPN service, that it's from one of the big VPN providers that offers you an absolute contractual ironclad agreement that they are not monitoring your data. Because basically when you do a VPN, you're disconnecting, you're hiding your data from your local internet service provider. You're still going over their wires, but they can't understand it, they can't read it, they can't decrypt it. But the VPN provider itself is decrypting it on the other end, because it has to be decrypted at some point. It has to be unencrypted so that the information is actually viable on the internet. And they theoretically could see it and read it. And the big ones that I know of, TunnelBear and Viper VPN, VYPR VPN, I think it is, are solid and well regarded. There's a bunch of other ones that are even more well regarded, or that hackers really favor. When I hooked up with these ones, I didn't go to all that trouble. TunnelBear has an app, and I have no affiliation with these companies. I don't even know who runs these companies, but TunnelBear has an app that you can get at the App Store for your phone, and they have an app that you can get from the App Store for your computer, and I use them both. So that's how it works. Have I answered your question, Mike?
Yes, you did. But one quick question on that: Do you get penalized from Comcast or AT&T for subscribing to a VPN company?
That is a great question, and yeah, I noticed back a couple of years ago that, and at the time I was using Viper VPN, and I mentioned that because they have a feature here. I noticed that my contract with Comcast when we were living on the boat in D.C. was that I had, I believe it was 50 MIPS down and 10 MIPS up is my recollection. It might have been 20 MIPS down and 5 MIPS up. But whenever I used my VPN, they throttled me at 5 MIPS down, 5 megabits per second, and which is against the terms of the service. So what Viper VPN did, this VPN provider, is they provide a service called Chameleon, where they not only encrypt your data, but then in the packets that surround your data, they make it look like it's a normal connection. So your internet service provider doesn't realize that you're using an encrypted VPN. And then Comcast stops throttling me. And that's why I was using Viper VPN when we were in D.C. Because if I'm downloading video, I need more than 5 megabits or if I'm downloading large video files, for my show, I'm trying to download a 5 gigabyte file. I want to get that thing, in 3 minutes, not an hour. And so I started using Viper VPN because they had this chameleon mode that allowed you to do that. So that's everything I know about it, Mike. And, I hope I haven't, I'm sure if I have misinformed you, somebody will call and set it straight. But that's everything I know about it. Mike, yeah, good talking to you, Mike. Thanks for asking a great question. We'll be right back.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Friday the 13th. We're broadcasting live from Mike Papantonio's Mass Torts Made Perfect conference here in Las Vegas. We'll be back on Monday. Stick around. And welcome back. Robert in Casper, Wyoming, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind today?
Well, thanks for taking my call, Tom. As a member of the right here, when I voted for Trump, and I noticed Laura Ingraham, and I noticed even Tucker Carlson, a lot of us, even here on the right, are starting to question this wisdom of Syria. And I'd like to know, too, Tom, where is your congressional authority to start a war with an independent nation or a sovereign nation that hasn't done anything to us? I mean, we haven't been attacked. I mean, we got 2,000 troops on foreign soil. Where's the congressional authority, Tom? What happened to these guys?
I absolutely agree with you, Robert. And the authority that they will cite is the AUMF of 2001. In 2001, after the 9/11 attacks, Congress passed an authorization to use military force, the AUMF. And that AUMF said that the military was, the administration using their military was empowered to engage in what we referred to during the Vietnam War as a police action rather than a war. To find and end the activities of those people who were affiliated with the destruction of the World Trade Center towers and the Pentagon and Shanksville, Pennsylvania on 9/11. And what has happened is George Bush used that to expand beyond al-Qaeda as ISIS started to grow toward the end of his administration and expand his war. And then Barack Obama used this. And I'm critical of all these guys in this context. I think that what Bush did was illegal or at least unconstitutional. And I think what Obama did was illegal and unconstitutional. What Obama did was say, we're going to take that and expand it. And somehow Muammar Gaddafi now, we took down Gaddafi in Libya. Somehow Gaddafi must have had something to do with 9/11, which we all know is BS. And somehow Bashar al-Assad in Syria had something to do with 9/11. Again, BS. And the rationale was that we were chasing ISIL, which is a spin-off group from Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda was the guy that Osama bin Laden started. But it's all BS. And I'm with you, Robert. None of this is constitutional. None of this is legal. It hasn't been. Frankly, I don't think the AUMF in the very beginning was legal or constitutional, unless that police action was saying, "Hey, we're going to ask a couple other countries who are also members of the international treaty that authorizes the international police force, Interpol, the international police force. If Interpol is going after people, fine, that's legal." But if you're using an army to go after people, that's called war. And war, according to the Constitution, requires a congressional authorization. We didn't have one for the Korean War, and that cost Harry Truman his presidency. Dwight Eisenhower in 1952 campaigned on peace in Korea and arguing that the Korean War itself was unconstitutional. This was an argument made by a Republican.
Right. If I may, Tom, what did Trump ran, and they all do it, Lyndon Johnson, Dwight Eisenhower, every one of them, they run as peace candidates. And what I'm saying, Tom, is that people like you on the left and me on the right, we need to get together as American citizens and stop this kind of nonsense.
Absolutely agree with you, Robert. I absolutely agree with you. And, one of the best calls of the day. Robert, thank you very much. We'll be back. Here live from Las Vegas, Thom Hartmann with you, and David. I'm sorry? Oh, that's right, Luke Vargas. Thank you very much, Sean. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News is on the line with us. I wasn't keeping track of the time, Luke. I'm sorry. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. And Luke, what's this report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. Luke, what's going on in the world?
Well, the big news here at the United Nations today is just this sort of drumbeat towards some sort of military conflict with Syria, it seems, something launched by the U.S. and its allies. There was the second consecutive day of UN Security Council meetings on this possible coalition strike held this morning. And I have to say, with each passing day, the political tensions just keep getting ratcheted up. Today, you saw Russia's ambassador come out. He alleged that Great Britain was directly responsible for the chemical weapons attack last week, saying it not only was it not the Assad government, but it was basically Western intelligence agencies that had fabricated the entire thing. Suffice it to say, Nikki Haley, he didn't provide any evidence, but he made that claim. Nikki Haley was basically flabbergasted, unsurprisingly. The little piece of news she said is that the administration here has not decided on exactly what their response is going to be, though if they make some sort of military response, they would be doing it for humanitarian reasons, which is the sort of flimsy justification given for all of these sorts of things. Let me just say a few little bits which give a sort of hint of the activity in Washington that could speak to a prelude to strikes. One is that the Pentagon has scheduled a press briefing with reporters, not a televised one, but basically come into our spokesperson's office at 4 p.m., and we will tell you whether or not you need to be here tonight or into the early hours of the morning. That is not something they've done throughout the week. So there is at least, some, they want to be out in front of, the coverage of this. James Mattis, the DOD secretary, was supposed to be in New York City today for a meeting with, of all people, Henry Kissinger. I'm not sure why that was something that was even on his agenda, but that was scrapped at the last minute so he can remain at the Pentagon. And of course, Trump's schedule is basically empty. He's not going down to Mar-a-Lago until Tuesday, I believe, for the summit with Prime Minister Abe. And we've learned that U.S. warships, a second U.S. warship, has moved into the Mediterranean, the exact kind of warship that fired off Tomahawk missiles in the attack last year. So there does seem to be some movement at the Pentagon, but it's kind of hard to tell exactly when the trigger might be pulled, if you will.
Remarkable. Do you think the trigger will be pulled?
It's tough to say. I mean, I find it hard to believe President Trump, who does seem to like to be quite theatrical, and likes to prove that he is a decisive actor, would walk back from the threats earlier this week. But at the same time, here's a man who I think is loath to accept responsibility for his actions. And over the course of the last few days has probably been thinking about, oh boy, I'm going to have to meet with Vladimir Putin at some point. How would I explain to him, why Russian troops were killed in a U.S. missile strike or some sort of other real downside consequence of a military action here? So I don't feel like we have all the indications Trump is ready to take responsibility for all the downside risks that would stem
on the
from
one hand, on the one hand, he campaigned on no more stupid wars. On the other hand, he has replaced his national security advisor with John Bolton, who is aggressively purging the national security staff of people who are not neoconservatives, who are, basically warmongers. So, boy, talk about conflicting messages. Anyhow, what else is going on in the world, Luke?
Let me just say very briefly, there has been some rumor that the French might lead a military strike, and that would perhaps fit into this, desire from President Trump not to be the one bearing the bulk of responsibility here, though I feel like even if France, the UK, and the US all did something collectively, most people would probably realize it's American intelligence and things that are, and the American impetus that's behind the attack. But, yeah.
Might that be because Macron is having political problems at home, and just like Maggie Thatcher, just like Ronald Reagan, you have political problems. When the Reagan had the Grenada invasion basically in his back pocket for a couple of years, and then when the Marines got killed in Beirut 2 days later, he launches an invasion of Grenada so that everybody would forget about it, which worked, by the way.
You can't rule it out. And I have to say, by contrast to the U.S., where our degree of caring, at least at the current political level, about Syrians basically begins with caring about chemical weapons and stops far short of doing anything to get them out of harm's way, like taking them in as refugees. France is, there's a more sympathetic public to wanting to do something in Syria. So again, possibly France could lead this. And I will point out, France is the only country whose head of state has come out and said that they have hard evidence, or that they claim they have hard evidence of Syria's role in the chemical attack. Even today, pressed over and over, Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis said, look, the U.S. believes Syria is behind this, but we don't have any concrete evidence. So the fact that the French are out there taking the lead and sort of pointing the blame at Syria could suggest they're ready to not only make those accusations, but follow it up as well.
Yeah. So then the question becomes, if the French lead the strike, but we fire missiles from one of our battleships, will the Russians follow through on their threat to sink our battleship?
I doubt we
think it's
that,
possible, Luke?
Hard to say. I don't think so.
Yeah.
But there's lots of other possibilities for escalation.
Amen. Luke Vargas. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to thomsbeats.com. That's 800-568-9889, Thom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
In the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from American Holocaust by David Stannard, The Conquest of the New World. This is from the prologue. Just 21 years after Columbus's first landing in the Caribbean, the vastly populous island that the explorer had renamed Hispaniola was effectively desolate. Nearly 8 million people, those Columbus chose to call Indians, had been killed by violence, disease, and despair. It took a little longer, about the span of a single human generation, but what happened on Hispaniola was the equivalent of more than 50 Hiroshimas, and Hispaniola was only the beginning. Within no more than a handful of generations following their first encounters with Europeans, the vast majority of the Western Hemisphere's native peoples had been exterminated. The pace and magnitude of their obliteration varied from place to place and from time to time, but for years, now historical demographers have been uncovering in region upon region post-Columbia depopulation rates of between 90 and 98%, with such regularity that an overall decline of 95% in Native American population has become a working rule of thumb. What this means is that, on average, for every 20 natives alive at the moment of European contact, when the lands of the Americans teemed with numerous tens of millions of people, only one stood in their place when the bloodbath was over. To put this in a contemporary context, the ratio of native survivorship in the Americas following European contact was less than half of what the human survivorship ratio would be in the United States today if every single white person and every single black person died. The destruction of the Indians of the Americas was far and away the most massive act of genocide in the history of the world. That is why, as one historian aptly has said, far from the heroic and romantic heraldry that customarily is used to symbolize the European settlement of the Americas, the emblem most congruent with reality would be a pyramid of skulls. Scholars estimate the size of the post-Columbian Holocaust have climbed sharply in recent decades. Too often, however, academic discussions of this ghastly event have reduced the devastated indigenous people and their cultures to statistical calculations in reconciling demographic analyses. It was easy for this to happen. From the very beginning, merely taking the account of so mammoth a cataclysm seemed an impossible task. Wrote one Spanish adventurer who arrived in the New World only 2 decades after Columbus's first landing, and who himself openly reveled in the torrent of native blood. There was neither, quote, paper nor time enough to tell all that the conquistadors did to ruin the Indians and rob them and destroy the land, end quote. As a result, the very effort to describe the disaster's overwhelming magnitude has tended to obliterate both the writer's and the reader's sense of its truly horrific human element. In an apparent effort to counteract this tendency, one writer, Tsvetsan Todorov, began his study of the events of 1492 and immediately thereafter with an epigraph from Diego de Landa's Relación de las Casas de Yucatán. Quote, the captain, Alonso López de Avila, brother-in-law of the Adelmento de Montejo, captured during the war in Bacalan a young Indian woman of lovely and gracious appearance. She had promised her husband, fearful lest they should kill him in the war, not to have relations with any other man but him, and so no persuasion was sufficient to prevent her from taking her own life to avoid being defiled by another man. And because of this, they had her thrown to the dogs. Toborov then dedicates his book to the memory of a Mayan woman devoured by dogs. It is important to try and hold in mind an image of that woman and her brothers and sisters and the innumerable others who suffered similar fates as one reads Todorov's book, or this one, or any other work on this subject, just as it is essential, as one reads about the Jewish Holocaust or the horrors of the African slave trade, to keep in mind the treasure of a single life in order to avoid becoming emotionally anesthetized by the sheer force of such overwhelming human evil and destruction. There is, for example, the case of a small Indian boy whose name no one knows today, and whose unmarked skeletal remains are hopelessly intermingled with those of hundreds of anonymous others in a mass grave on the American plains, but a boy who once played on the banks of a quiet creek in eastern Colorado, until the morning in 1864, when the American soldiers came. Then, as one of the cavalrymen later told it, while his compatriots were slaughtering and mutilating the bodies of all the women and all of the children they could catch, he spotted the boy trying to flee. Quote, "There was one child, probably 3 years old, just big enough to walk through the sand. The Indians had gone ahead and this little child was behind following after them. The little fellow was perfectly naked, traveling on the sand. I saw one man get off his horse at a distance of about 75 yards and drop his rifle and fire, but he missed the child. Another man came up and said, 'Let me try the son of a bitch, I can hit him.' He got down off his horse, kneeled down, and fired at the little child, but he missed him too. A third man came up and made a similar remark and fired, and the little fellow dropped." We must do what we can to recapture and try to understand in human terms what it was that was crushed, what it was that was butchered. It is not enough merely to acknowledge that much was lost. So close to total was the human incineration and carnage. And it continues. Life.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just a few other things that are in the news of today and that I think are rather consequential. This is a big one. The Washington Post and the Kaiser Foundation. The Kaiser Foundation principally focuses on health issues. In fact, I used to work right across the street from their building in Washington, D.C., and they've got a big strip along the top of the building that has a continuous scroll of the news feed, and it's all healthcare news, you know, but it's like really wonky healthcare news, like this health insurance company is buying this health insurance company, or this piece of legislation is before Congress, and here's how it'll affect you. They're really good on this stuff. They're completely nonpartisan. It's an unbiased organization. They just report what's going on, the Kaiser Family Foundation. And the Washington Post hooked up with them to do a poll. And they did a rather substantial poll of Americans. You can find this over at the Washington Post. There's a whole article about it. They did a rather substantial poll of Americans to find out what they thought about the Affordable Care Act and what they thought about single-payer health insurance. And what they found was that a majority of Americans support the Affordable Health Care Act, you know, the Obamacare. But more importantly, and I think more shockingly, at least for those people who just listen to the mainstream media, which never talks about single-payer health care, because it's socialist, don't you know? And I mean, even MSNBC is mostly Republicans on that television program, particularly as guests, was that 51% of Americans support single-payer health care. 74% of Democrats support single-payer health care. And this is with no support from the institutional Democratic Party, you know, out there really pushing this. I mean, you haven't heard any of the big, you know, when was the last time you heard Dianne Feinstein talking about single-payer health care? Never, for example. So more than half of Americans, an absolute majority of Americans, support single-payer health care. I think it's time for us to start having a serious national conversation about this. And of course, that should start in our media. It's not, but it should. Number one. Number two, this is a Washington Post ABC News poll. And what they found is that nearly 70% of Americans, 60 and change, high 60s and change, nearly 7 in 10 American adults support Robert Mueller's focus on possible collusion with Russia, which just makes sense. I mean, you know, if there's an allegation that a foreign country, and I don't care if it's Russia or Panama, if there's a foreign country that has screwed with our elections, we need to know about it. And we need to stop it. So, number one, 70%, roughly slightly less than 70% of Americans support Mueller's investigation. And 64% of Americans want Robert Mueller to investigate Donald Trump's business activities. 58% of Americans support investigating Robert Mueller, investigating whether Trump paid off women for silence about his sexual activities. These numbers are big. And again, I would say, you know, the Democrats really should be taking this seriously. And in the news just now, Donald Trump just pardoned Scooter Libby. Now, why did Donald Trump pardon Scooter Libby? This is a really important thing. And I haven't, you know, I've been on the air for 2 hours here. I haven't had an opportunity to catch how the media is playing this. But this is my take on it, just right off the top of my head. But I believe I'm solid on this. There are two factors, I think, that led to Donald Trump pardoning Scooter Libby. Number one, it's been something that the hard right, the Sean Hannity hard right, the Laura Ingraham hard right, has been supporting ever since George W. Bush commuted his sentence but did not pardon him. So Libby didn't go to jail. George Bush saw to that. Libby, by the way, you know, was Dick Cheney's chief of staff. He lied to Congress. He lied to the FBI. And he lied to a federal grand jury about outing a CIA agent as revenge on behalf of Dick Cheney, about outing Valerie Plame, and destroying thus a program that Valerie Plame was running. She had set up a front company, and this went back more than a decade, right? This was a deep operation of the CIA. They set up this front company in countries and as a international trading company, right? We are just a for-profit company that buys and sells stuff. And they actually bought and sold stuff. They set up this front company, and it did business by coincidence in countries like Afghanistan or Iraq or Turkey or, you know, places where there was Saudi Arabia. I'm not sure about Saudi Arabia, but places where there was significant activity by Al-Qaeda groups. And by doing business in these countries, and in some cases doing business with Al-Qaeda fronts, they were able to get the inside skinny on what was going on in these countries and among these Al-Qaeda agents, and this operation had actually brought down terrorists. It was one of the best chances that the CIA had of bringing down Al-Qaeda. This was an operation that was being run by Valerie Plame, a long-term, serious, solid, well-connected CIA officer. And when her husband, Joe Wilson, put an editorial in the New York Times saying that George Bush and in particular Dick Cheney were lying about the yellow cake uranium from Niger going up to Iraq, to Saddam Hussein. When he wrote an op-ed saying, I went to Niger, I talked to the people who would have sold that yellow cake uranium. When he wrote that op-ed, and it didn't happen, and Dick Cheney is lying to you about it, when he put that in the New York Times, Dick Cheney said, take down his wife. Or as far as we can tell, Dick Cheney said this. And his loyal assistant, Scooter Libby, went after Valerie Plame and destroyed her and destroyed an elaborate multi-country CIA operation. Now, can you imagine if a Democrat had done this, how the Republicans? This is Benghazi times 50. Or it's the Benghazi allegations times 50. Turns out there was no there with Benghazi. This is an actual there. This hurt the CIA. This hurt our national security. It diminished our ability to take down Al-Qaeda. And Scooter Libby lied to a federal grand jury about it, lied to the FBI about it, lied to congressional investigators about this. And they were going to prosecute him and put him in prison for years. George Bush commuted his sentence. Donald Trump just pardoned him. Now, why did Trump pardon him? Because Trump has his own people who have lied to federal grand juries and who have lied to the FBI and who have lied to congressional investigators, starting with Michael Flynn and Paul Manafort. And how do we know this? Because Manafort has not pled guilty, but Michael Flynn has. Excuse me. So I think that what this pardon is all about, nakedly, on its face, Donald Trump, he wants to get a message to Paul Manafort. Hang tight, guy, because you're the one who can take me down. You're the one who knows what's going on. You're the one who was running Reagan's Southern strategy that got Reagan, speaking in the county fair right down the street from where the 3 civil rights workers were murdered in 1964. You're the guy who knows what the secrets that can take down me, Donald Trump. So hang tight, because I will pardon you. And he's saying to the other people like Michael Cohen now, who are in a position of trying to decide whether or not to cooperate with the FBI, if you continue to lie to the FBI, if you continue to lie to the grand jury, I will pardon you. Don't worry, I'll take care of you. He can't do this by pardoning Michael Flynn right now, because that would create an absolute firestorm or an S-storm. It would be a mess. But he needed a symbolic action to telegraph to the people that are being investigated by the FBI and a federal grand jury, if you continue lying or you keep your mouth shut, I've got your back. And pardoning Scooter Libby was the way to do that. It makes Sean Hannity happy, and it informs all these people.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And this is the exact kind of behavior that James Comey described when he said Donald Trump is acting like a mafia don. Welcome back. Let's see here. Paul Martin, watching us on YouTube in Oslo, Norway. Hey, Paul Martin, what's on your mind today? And thanks for watching us in Norway. Are you an American or are you Norwegian?
No, I'm Norwegian. I actually just love the show.
Great, thank you.
So I'm calling about the size of the country. So I'm trying to imagine if Europe was one country and what kind of ramifications that would make. So elections and media, banking, healthcare. It just seems like a disaster. If Europe was one country, there would be so much polarization and so much rigidness in the system. So isn't this just essentially what the USA is today?
Yes, it is. And I would argue that exploitative politics is what brought us this. But there's a strong argument to be made that America is too large to be a single unified country. Although throughout most of our history, we have been a single unified country. But when Richard Nixon started his Southern strategy, he began the process that could lead to a second civil war. I doubt it would be a hot war, but I would say that we are in the second civil war right now, which is one coalition of states versus another coalition of states. It's just being played out in the political sphere.
So would you actually support, like, for example, California being its own country? They would definitely pass healthcare and, obvious things, don't you think?
Yeah. California would become Norway, and New York State would become France. And, some of the smaller states north of New York State would become, the smaller states that align themselves with Western Europe. And the southern states would become Hungary, and they would elect their own Viktor Orbáns, and they would descend into, hardcore right-wing authoritarianism, which they've embraced since the founding of the Republic, frankly, with slavery and everything else. Yeah, I see that playing out, absolutely. And that's why I was skeptical of the European Union experiment from the get-go, frankly.
Right. Well, maybe in the beginning, but don't you think, if California actually did this and showed the country what can be done, don't you think the rest of the states would finally, see the lights and follow?
I think that's entirely possible, and that's why whenever anybody in any state starts talking about secession, leaving the Union, there is an absolute incredible pushback, from pundits and whatnot aligned with the state, as it were. to say, oh, these people are fringe and they're crazy and it ain't going to happen, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think America has. We lived through a horrible civil war, and although there's nobody alive today who remembers it, there are people alive today who remember ancestors who survived the Civil War or children of ancestors who survived the Civil War who have told the stories. And there's a lot of Civil War buffs. I mean, we very much keep that history alive, in part to promote the racism associated with the Confederacy, frankly. I don't think there's a lot of Union-affiliated families who are, fond to keep the memory of the Civil War alive, but it's certainly a big deal in the South. And I don't think that even Southerners, by and large, want to see that repeated.
Yeah. And also a lot of people identify with the federal icon, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. The national mythology is deeply ingrained. The George Washington, the founding fathers, and it's not just a mythology. And there's a significant reality to it, but much of it has become a mythology. Paul Martin, thanks for the call. I hope you call again. I'd love to discuss the EU with you sometime in the Eurozone. I appreciate the call, and thanks from Norway, the land of my father. It is 20 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. David in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. It is extremely frustrating to be an American right now.
Because?
And I say that in reference to the Syria crisis that we're going through right now. We have the whole mainstream media essentially pushing war. And not very much pushback except from some independent media who are saying, let's wait for the facts to come in and, go through the process of an investigation and all that. And it just is, I'm a student of history, and I know, how many times would you say that the American government has misled the public into a war?
I don't know about the Korean War, but I would say in every war of consequence in my lifetime, certainly the media has been complicit in it. And that, raises just this very, very simple question. I don't believe I'm talking out of school because I know Cenk Uygur has said these things on the air before. Last night, Cenk and I were sitting next to each other at the Whoopi Goldberg gig here in Vegas, and she came to speak to Papantonio's conference, which was just wonderful. She's such a cool person and such a great person, and as a human being as well as a brilliant comedian. But in any case, before she came on, Cenk and I were talking, and he was talking about how he's had people say, well, these other networks, like my show and his show and some other television networks and whatnot that are not based in the United States. Or American corporate owned. I mean, Cenk and I are both based in the United States, and we both own our own shows. He said, well, these other networks, they have a bias, right? If you want to watch Agence France Presse, you're going to get the French point of view. And he said to the guy, as Cenk was telling me, he said to the guy, wait a minute, you think that CNN doesn't have a bias? He said, are you really seriously telling me that a multi-billion-dollar for-profit corporation that both by law and by policy has to be guided as its principal goal to do nothing more than increase profits doesn't have an agenda? And he said at that point, the guy said, okay, point taken. And that's the thing we have to keep in mind, David, is that war is insanely profitable for television networks. They love war. Wolf Blitzer's career was made by the first Iraq War, as was the case with Christiana Amanpour. And I'm not criticizing these people specifically, but I'm just saying emblematic of how the cream rises to the top. Stars are made, network money is made. They develop logos, they brand wars. I encourage people to go back and watch Wag the Dog, the movie. You can rent it for $3 on Amazon. It is so apropos for today. It's a brilliant comedy. You'll love it. But I am very concerned about this. They certainly lied us into the Iraq War. They supported the Afghanistan War. They supported the Vietnam War. Until finally Walter Cronkite went over there and came back and said, hey, we're being lied to. And Mitt Romney's dad, George Romney, said the same thing, which killed his presidential ambitions, but he was right. And so, yeah, David, I agree with your assessment, and I'm very concerned about it.
Yeah, it's just startling to watch this unfold. I'm 29 years old. I was a young man, teenager when the Iraq War was going on, and like I said, I'm a student of history. I attend a university for a history degree, and I know what hell. Yeah, like you said, it's not just the American government, but the American corporate media is, like you said, they love it. They get big ratings off of it. They, sponsors. I mean, on and on and on. And
plus, the military-industrial complex makes a fortune. I mean, there's big money to be made. You're spot on, David. And this, in my opinion, this is why we have not had a constitutional war resolution since World War II. Is that Congress, representing the people, to the extent that they represent the people, has not since World War II had a strong enough mandate to be able to actually successfully pass a congressional war resolution to declare war. So instead they declare these police actions that our military is supposed to do. And it's just wrong. It's crazy and it's wrong. David, I got to move along, but thanks for the call. Well said. Joseph in San Jose. Joseph, you want to talk about Syria too?
Hi, how are you?
I'm sorry?
Hello?
Yeah.
Hi, yes, Tom, I was calling regarding the Syria issue as well.
Okay.
I was wondering, what is your opinion on there's sort of this, and this alludes to what your previous caller was talking about, but with regards to this sort of alternate narrative of what's going on in Syria in terms of the people seem actually overwhelmingly support him as a result of because due to the opposition, which seems to be more of the radical ilk, and that basically, there's obviously an agenda to get rid of Assad due to geopolitical and economic reasons, and as a result of our allies in the region, namely, some of the Gulf Arab states that have an incentive to remove a Shiite, Alawite from power, who's aligned with Iran, who's the main adversary in the region.
Yeah, I think this is a significant and consequential concern, and one that we shouldn't overlook. And not only are the Sunni states, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and others, not only are the Sunni states largely supportive of an attempt to take down an Alawite government, essentially a government aligned with the Shia, and thus aligned with Iran. Not only are they in favor of that, but Israel is as well. And Israel has considerable influence over American foreign policy. So when you look at the players in the region, you can see why this war might play out. The giant wild card is that Russia has, their deep water port in that region is in Syria, and they're interested in protecting their own military asset. So just as we would be if somebody was, if Al Qaeda was trying to take down Qatar. So this is a very, very, very sticky situation, and it's not the simplistic good guys versus bad guys. The other point I'd make, Joseph, is you talk about how easily we're manipulated. During the Gulf War, what got us to attack Saddam Hussein was not WMD. It was that woman testifying that they were throwing babies out of incubators. We are so easily...
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We are so easily manipulated by a well-told story about individual human suffering. It's dangerous. Joseph, thanks for the call. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat. The True Story of the White Nation by J. Sakai, published by Morningstar Press in 1989. This is from Chapter 2, The Foundations of Settler Life. The life of European settlers and the class structure of their society was abnormal because it was dependent upon a foundation of conquest, genocide, and enslavement. The myth of the self-sufficient white settler family clearing the wilderness and supporting themselves through their own initiative and hard labor is a propaganda fabrication. It is the absolute characteristic of settler society to be parasitic, dependent upon the super exploitation of oppressed peoples for its style of life. Never has Euro-American society completely supported itself. This is the decisive factor in the consciousness of all classes and strata of white society from 1600 to now. Settler society was raised up above the level of backward old Europe by a foundation of conquest. This conquest was a miracle drug for a Europe convulsed with the reaction of decaying feudalism and deadly capitalism. Shot into the veins of the Spanish feudal nation, for instance, the miracle drug of the New World conquest gave Spain the momentary power to overrun North Africa, Holland, and Italy before her historical incident waned. Like many such fixes for Euro-Americans, this conquest was addicting. It was habit-forming and rapidly indispensable, not only culturally, but in the mechanism of an oppressor society whose lifeblood was new conquest. We'll examine this later in the relationship of settlerism to imperialism. For now, it's enough to see that this conquest is a material act of great magnitude, an economic and social event as important as the emergence of the factory system or the exploitation of petroleum in the Middle East. We stress the obvious here because the Euro-American settlers have always made light of their invasion and occupation, although the conquered territory is the precondition for their whole society. Traditionally, European settler societies throw off the propaganda smoke screens that they didn't really conquer and dispossess other nations. They claim with false modesty that they merely moved into vacant territory. So the early English settlers depicted America as empty, a howling wilderness, unsettled, sparsely populated, just waiting with a vacant sign on the door for the first lucky civilization to walk in and claim it. Theodore Roosevelt wrote defensively in 1900, quote, "The settler and pioneer have at bottom had justice on their side. This great continent could not have been kept as nothing but a game preserve for squalid savages," end of quote. It is telling that this lie is precisely the same lie put forward by white Afrikaner settlers who claim that South Africa was literally totally uninhabited by any Africans when they arrived from Europe. To universal derision, these European settlers claim to be the only rightful historic inhabitants of South Africa. Or we can hear similar defenses put forward by the European settlers of Israel, who claim that much of the Palestinian land and buildings they occupy are rightfully theirs, since the Arabs had allegedly decided to voluntarily abandon it all during the 1948-49 war. Are these kinds of tales any less preposterous than those put forward by Euro-American settlers? America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived at Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretching from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies. There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus, there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in Central Mexico, and an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and South America. These numbers have long been concealed since they give rise to the logical question of what happened to this great mass of people. The European invaders, Spanish, Dutch, English, Portuguese, and French, simply killed off millions and millions to safeguard their conquest of the land and provide the disposable slave labor they needed to launch their new world. Conservative Western historical estimates show that the Spanish reduced, in quotes, the Indian population of their colonies from some 50 million to only 4 million by the end of the 17th century. And from the 10 million Indians who once inhabited North America, after 4 centuries of settler invasion and rule, there were in 1900 perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 surviving descendants in the United States. This was the very substantial down payment towards the continuing blood price that third world nations have to pay to sustain the Euro-American way of life. So when we hear that the settlers pushed out the Indians or forced the Indians to leave their traditional hunting grounds, we know that these are just code phrases to refer politely to the most barbaric genocide imaginable. It could well be the greatest crime in all of human history. Only here, the Adolf Eichmanns and Heinrich Himmlers had names like Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Jackson. The point is that genocide was not an accident, not an excess, not the unintended side effect of virile European growth. Genocide was the necessary and deliberate act of the capitalists and their settler shock troops. The book Settlers.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Wow, breaking news. Elliot Broidy is a 60-year-old, rather strange-looking fellow. I don't know how to describe it beyond that. You can look up his picture yourself and make your own conclusions. Who, according to the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, had allegedly had a multi-million-dollar lobbying contract on behalf of the Russian bank VTB, which is now sanctioned because of its connections to Vladimir Putin. He's been a guest of honor at all the bank's investor conferences every year. And the story here that I'm looking at, and this is in AlJazeera.com, the document raises serious questions. This is the 12-page, basically, indictment from the Ukrainian government. Raises serious questions about whether Broidy is in breach of the U.S. Foreign Agents Registration Act. And then they point out Manafort and Rick Gates were also charged as a result of their work in Ukraine. So this is who Broidy is, right? He's you know, and he's a venture capitalist, you know, a multimillionaire, maybe a billionaire, who knows, or at least I don't know, and you know, associated with this Russian bank that's now sanctioned. Now comes the story that apparently Broidy was also using Michael Cohen as a fixer with regard to his sexual problems. If I'm reading this story right, and you can read it over at rawstory.com, it's by Brad Reed, and the headline is Trump's lawyer Cohen arranged $1.6 million payout to Playmate after affair with top GOP donor led to abortion. Apparently, he cut a deal with a Playboy Playmate that if she would exclusively have sex with him for a year, he would pay her a certain amount of money. And according to this story, that amount of money is $1.6 million. That's pretty startling to begin with. And secondly, it was Michael Cohen who did it. Now, I'm not sure that's illegal. You know, you could argue that that's prostitution. Yes, I will screw you, you know, have sex with you exclusively for a year. Now, I doubt he was claiming exclusivity. In that case, they just have a marriage contract, but she had to be exclusive to him. And on top of that, she ended up pregnant. And on top of that, she chose to have an abortion. But on top of that, according to him, he has confessed this to the Wall Street Journal now, according to Broidy, if she decided to carry the baby, he'd pay child support. I don't know if the guy's married or single. This sounds like the kind of behavior that you'd get from a single guy. But what this tells us is that part of Michael Cohen's business as a lawyer was to be the guy who fixes sexual problems for billionaires. That's breathtaking. That's absolutely breathtaking. Scott in Alameda, California. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind?
Hey, going back to the Valerie Plame, Brewster Jennings story with the Scooter Libby pardon.
Right, Brewster Jennings was the name of the front company that she ran on behalf of the CIA to take down al-Qaeda, that Scooter Libby and Dick Cheney destroyed.
Right, the non-official cover business, which meant that they were all risking their lives operating in this company. If they got caught, they didn't have any diplomatic cover. So
and there were stories after Scooter and Dick Cheney blew the whistle on this that while no CIA agents themselves were murdered, that at least some CIA-affiliated assets may have been murdered, which is pretty grim stuff.
Yeah, it is. The one point about this, or a couple points, is one, they were tracking the AQ-Con network, which was transferring nuclear technology to North Korea. Okay, that was just right there. That's just huge, and that story never went anywhere. Nobody ever paid any price for that. And now nuclear technology is in North Korea. And Dick Cheney is directly responsible for that. The other thing is, if you recall, they used a forged letterhead from the embassy in Rome for Niger. Okay, it was very sloppily done. They used the wrong ambassador's name, and the guy that was involved in the break-in and planting of this evidence was a Italian operative for SISMI, which is the Italian Secret Service, or whatever you want to call it, intelligence agency. He was also involved in earlier stuff going on in Italy with Gladio and the Vatican Bank and all sorts of terror funding on that regard, which leads to the coining of the phrase deep state. Okay, deep state was coined by a Turkish intelligence officer who had to explain how it was that one of their top intelligence guys and a top Turkish drug dealer were killed in an auto accident together. And so the press was saying, how did these two guys end up in the same car together? And the Turkish intelligence guy says it's the deep state. Okay, so you've got this idea of these.
I got to tell you, Scott, the phrase deep state goes back to the 1950s, for what it's worth.
Sure.
It didn't originate with a Turkish intelligence officer.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll give you that, but he's referring to the idea of a shadowy, drug-infused, arms-infused, secret operatives, government arms dealers, drug dealers, now looks like prostitution. That's why the Republicans won't do anything. This stuff has been going on for years and years and years and years.
No, this goes back to Reagan and probably back to Nixon. I agree. And Scott, thanks for the history lesson.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, good talking to you. I appreciate it. Sam Cedar just dropped by. Sam, a friend, a colleague, regular commentator on MSNBC. You do the show, The Majority Report. You're part of the Ring of Fire Network.
Yes.
You do the Ring of Fire show as well with Mike Papantonio and Robert Kennedy Jr. And we're both here at the Mass Torts Made Perfect conference. Pap's I was going to say his little gig. This is huge. There's hundreds and hundreds of lawyers here.
There's hundreds and hundreds of lawyers here, and they have some fascinating stories that are often, frankly, really disturbing about corporate malfeasance.
Yeah.
And
the thing with Monsanto that they presented yesterday was apparently mind-boggling.
With Monsanto, I spoke to an attorney today who is beginning to represent that they call multi-district litigations, a mass tort, slightly different than a class action. Where people have a different sort of set of damages, but they are all been impacted by the same tort, essentially. And about the indigestion medicines, the PPIs, I guess.
Proton pump inhibitors.
Exactly. And
this is like Nexium and Prilosec.
Prilosec, and apparently these there is a large epidemiologist study that suggests that, or shows that extended use of this stuff can cause real problems with your kidneys. Yeah. And that there has been an awareness of this by the manufacturers of these PPIs, and apparently they call them Me Too drugs, not to be confused with the Me Too movement, but drugs that a slight change in their molecular structure, they can sell them. So this is one of those drugs where many manufacturers have gotten in the business.
So they came up with one basic proton pump inhibitor, and then in order to keep them under patent, they just would switch one molecule here and there and say, it's a brand new drug. We can sell it for $20 a pill instead of $1 a pill.
Right, and a lot of companies got into this business. So it's a $10 billion a year business.
Holy crap.
And, but apparently, you see Larry the Cable Guy saying, I take it every day.
So Larry's risking kidney failure.
Apparently, yes. And so, the human rights attorney who is suing a German manufacturer of the chemical weapons factories in Iraq on behalf of his plaintiffs are either survivors of chemical attacks in the Kurdish population and Iranians who suffered from in the Iraq-Iran war, or the estates of those people.
Is this Bayer?
No, it's a now known as TUI, T-U-I, and it was a different company at the time. They came in and built the facilities and had every reason to believe that they were not building a facility for pesticides.
So a German company, I mean, shades of, the week of Holocaust remembrance, so that was yesterday, the day before, a German company making poison gas in Iraq that was used, and a million Iranians died in that war.
Yes, they actually made the factory. They built the factory, not necessarily the chemicals. They built the factory to create the chemicals.
So then the Iraqis ran the factory.
Yes, within it was a gas chamber that was presumably to test on pests, right? Because this was supposedly a pesticide factory.
So I'm guessing the pests that they tried it on were dogs and cats, probably?
And donkeys.
And donkeys. Wow.
And then they had an incinerator there to get rid of the carcasses. So, I mean, it's stories like this. I've interviewed over the years here, I don't know if you ever heard this Remington story. They're out of business, but they had one of the most, or I should say they're in bankruptcy, one of the most popular, if not the most popular rifle in the country that would fire without the trigger being touched.
By accident.
By a faulty design.
Right. Yeah.
And many people died.
That's
many people died, and people can check that story out in 60 Minutes. But yeah,
that's incredible.
Fascinating.
Sam Cedar is with us. We're both here at this conference, and anyhow, we'll pick up the conversation right after this. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back right after this in the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. If you're trying online dating, you know it can be a frustrating process. Lazy text messages, Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat, The True Story of the White Nation by Jason. Continue.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying that it's a great opportunity to hear these stories, and it's an interesting mix of people at this conference, as you know. I've interviewed over the years Rosa Parks' attorney from when she got on that bus. I mean, so strange intersection of people, and you know, when you start to see the degradation that we've seen on the regulatory state. Particularly under Trump, but I mean, certainly under the Bush years, and not necessarily as robust as we would want. I think in between, these folks are sort of like, you know, I got to get a posse together.
I heard a conversation last night about how tort reform in Texas has just absolutely devastated the ability of people who are injured on the job, or people who are injured by drugs, or people who are injured by incompetent or drunk or addicted doctors to sue for anything more than $250,000. I mean, that's the whole tort reform thing was, we'll cap it at that. And so the companies and the doctors, they just continue on their merry way. I mean, $250,000 is just, it's not even the cost of doing business.
Well, that's the thing I think that, you know, I came to understand is that the whole game is that the corporation knows that they have a cadre of lawyers that are full-time employees. Right. They will bury the other side. And, you know, one thing about Papantonio's firm is they're a big firm. They are highly capitalized. And so when they go up against a DuPont,
which they have done.
Which
and they're going against Monsanto right now.
Successfully, DuPont can't bury these guys in documents. They can't sort of overpower them because they have the assets to basically say, you want to give us 1.2 million documents, you want to give us 5 million documents? No, great. We'll go through every single one of them. And so it's really fascinating. Now, I dropped out of law school after a year. And so there is a little bit of like, you know, what could have been.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the idea of...
It's a hell of a profession. You know, if I knew now what I knew when I was thinking about going to college about what a trial lawyer can do, and by the way, 0.8% of American lawyers are trial lawyers, or even have the skills to be a trial lawyer, which is shocking. You know, not everybody is Matlock or Perry Mason. But if I had known then, this is a really exciting business.
Yeah, and you know, there's been a long-term program to villainize these guys and demonize them, and
ambulance chasers.
Ambulance chasers, but also, you know, like there was a movie called Hot Coffee that was a documentary about tort law, and it used a couple of examples of the stories, but there was that story, I'm sure you remember this, about the woman who spilled hot coffee on
Dorothy
her at McDonald's, and it became this sort of like, you know, joke and an example of like, frivolous lawsuits. When you hear the actual story, you realize like this was pretty serious. Not just in terms of what she, you know, she was an older woman. McDonald's would keep their coffee hot, you know, for corporate reasons, and she suffered quite a bit.
Yeah, but she was severely burdened. We got to take a break here. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the last 10 minutes of our program today. My apologies to the folks on the phone. Well, I'm going to talk to Sam Cedar. It's not often that we get an opportunity to talk, and Sam is right here sitting next to me. So we're going to wrap up the show this way. Sam, you know, we were talking about the conference and tort law and these lawyers. This is the Mass Torts Made Perfect conference. It's like, you know, how to sue big companies effectively and win. Right. But let's in the last, you know, I guess 8 minutes that we have left here, let's talk about what's going on in the news today. Yeah. Did you see this thing about Elliot Broidy?
No, I didn't.
This is the guy, you know, Rachel's done a bunch of segments about him because of his association with one of the largest Russian banks, which is now under sanction. It's a bank affiliated with Putin. And he arranged a $1.6 million payout to a Playboy playmate who had a one-year contract, consensual contract. Broidy has admitted this to the Wall Street Journal, a one-year contract to have sex exclusively with Broidy, and she would be paid $1.6 million. And Michael Cohen organized this thing, and Broidy is, you know, kind of the sketchy character.
Speaking of what lawyers can do that are not necessarily
yes, the dark side of the law.
Yeah, I mean.
But you know, this is like, you know, I'm wondering if Michael Cohen's principal business was being a fixer for billionaires who are getting it on with playmates. How many more women is he representing on behalf of Trump and of other billionaires?
You know, I knew a guy who had worked for a different billionaire in New York, not one of the same sort of acclaim, but extremely wealthy. And we were talking about Michael Cohen. He said, there are guys around who are in the orbit who just know. They don't have to be told. They just know this is what I take care of.
Right.
And so there's no, they don't get told on an incident by incident basis to go handle it. Right. They're in charge of handling all of that.
Well, and apparently American media, you know, David Pecker and the National Enquirer are part of that too. They paid $30,000 to this doorman to not talk about whether Trump had a love child with a maid in the hotel.
You know, there's a whole can of worms. I mean, what's sort of fascinating about what we're seeing here, and I, you know, I was having a conversation with another person last night about the whole Russian collusion aspect of it and the demonization of Russia, and to some extent, I think that's overblown. The Russian threat. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but I think that it on the list of issues it may get.
In terms of messing with our elections, if you compare Russia with Robert and Rebecca Mercer.
Oh, of course, exactly.
You know,
exactly.
It's no comparison.
Exactly.
So our elections are being screwed with. I mean, the Koch brothers, $400 million they threw into this election. Russia put what, $145,000 into Facebook.
Exactly. Exactly. But
But they shouldn't have done that either.
They shouldn't have done that. I happen to think that we probably do the same thing.
Probably? It's well documented.
Well, yes. But clearly what's really sort of fascinating about all this is coming into, is that there is so much criminality associated in the Trump orbit, and not just his orbit, this sort of cohort
the billionaire
of
class.
Society.
Yeah.
And this group just happened to get caught. Like, I'm quite convinced they did not think they were going to win the election. There was a lot of people who were like, I'm going to ride this out. I'm going to make some cash. Nobody's going to scrutinize this. I mean, this is the producers. This is literally the story of the producers. We're going to take
wag the dog.
Right. We're going to take 600% in investment in this play, and when it closes after 3 days, we're just going to tell everybody you lost your money, and we're going to walk away with all profits. But the play ends up being a hit, and now they're on the hook.
Yeah, this is the Mel Brooks movie and play.
Yes,
the producer.
and essentially, all the Trump people are on the hook now.
Right,
they're being scrutinized in a way that they
didn't expect.
They didn't expect,
Yeah.
and you know,
and to take it out of the realm of salacious, because that's kind of how it sounds. I started this thing. My concern, I don't care who Trump screws. I don't care who he pays. But the fact that he's blackmailable as a result of it, and he's president of the United States, and also we know that he had 3 and 4 year prenups with his first 2 wives, where both he and they were required to be faithful. And the reason he was able to walk away, I think that's what's going on with Melania.
I think that's exactly what's going on with Stormy Daniels. Exactly. I think that because they clearly, there's no reason for them to think that it would hurt them electorally.
Right.
He's on the hook for God knows how many millions of dollars.
Maybe billions.
It's very possible. I think that's exactly it. And I think, look, at the end of this, there's going to be a huge amount of financial impropriety. We're going to see a lot of money laundering. We're going to see a lot of different things that come out of this. Yeah. This is not a guy who was, this is a guy who was playing with gaming regulations in New Jersey in a way that
in
was
Vegas,
illicit.
The Trump Hotel down the street. I've heard that they don't have a casino because he couldn't meet their ethical standards.
Yes, I mean this is he has had all sorts of different. At one point, to salvage his Atlantic City casinos, he had his dad, who was also quite wealthy, just come in and give
with millions of dollars in chips.
In chips.
Just to lose it on the,
Yes,
yeah.
And so it is.
It seems to me that this is the first. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we just have a minute and a half left. It seems to me that this is the first time, in a consequential way, that law enforcement officials have taken a serious look at the billionaire class in America, and God only knows how far this is going to go.
Well,
because Trump is connected to all these guys, the
I
Kochs, the Mercers.
suspect they're going to keep it pretty narrow. Frankly, and
over the short term.
Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, I would like to see it broader, but guys like Steve Mnuchin, he should be in jail.
They've replaced the mafia.
Yeah,
this is the new mafia. It's the billionaire class in America.
And so, hopefully, it comes out of this, among other things, is a higher awareness of what's going on in terms of criminality in that class.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. From your lips to God's ears, Sam Cedar. Star of all things. A great guy. Sam, thanks, and Majority Report. Be sure to check out his podcast. Thanks a lot, Sam. Great to have you with us. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Louise and I will be back in Portland on Monday, by the way. So have a great weekend. But democracy is not a spectator sport. You've got to get out there. Make sure you're registered and all your friends are. Tell them about all the progressive media out there, including Majority Report, and tag You're It. We'll see you on Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeats.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beats, THOMSBEETS.com.